The deputy's second chance. When a dying widow raises a pistol to protect her infant son on the desolate Colorado plains, she never expects her savior to arrive on horseback with a badge and a broken heart. What begins as a desperate rescue becomes a journey of redemption, forgiveness, and unexpected love in the untamed West of 1873. Will a lonely lawman and a grieving widow find the courage to build a family from the ashes of their past? Stay with us until the end and comment below with your city so we can see how far this story travels across the world. The Colorado Plains stretched endlessly under a merciless sun, a vast expanse of golden grass and cracked earth that seemed to swallow hope itself. The year was 1873, and the frontier was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, a place where dreams came to die as often as they came to life. The wind whispered through the sage, carrying with it the promise of dust and desolation, and in that lonely wilderness a woman was dying. Kathleen Morgan stumbled forward, her boots catching on stones she no longer had the strength to avoid. Her calico dress, once a cheerful pattern of blue flowers, was now stained with dirt and sweat, the hem torn from days of walking. In her arms, wrapped in a faded quilt, was the only thing that mattered anymore. Her son, James. The baby, barely 3 months old, whimpered softly against her chest, his tiny fist clutching at her bodice as if he knew somehow that his mother's strength was fading. Behind her, 50 yards back on the trail, lay the body of her horse. The mare had collapsed an hour ago, foam at her mouth, legs trembling before they gave out completely. Kathleen had tried to get her up, had pulled at the reins and whispered desperate pleas, but the animal was spent. She'd taken what little water remained in the canteen, kissed the horse's neck in gratitude for carrying them as far as she had, and continued on foot. Now, with the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Kathleen knew she wouldn't make it to the next town. She didn't even know how far the next town was. Her husband's map had burned with their wagon 3 days ago, when the wheel broke and their campfire spread to the dry goods. Thomas had died trying to save their supplies, a falling beam crushing him before her eyes. She'd screamed his name until her voice gave out, but the prairie had swallowed her grief with indifference. She'd buried him herself, shallow and quick, marking the grave with stones because she had no tools for proper digging. Then she'd loaded what little survived onto the horse and rode east, away from their failed homestead, away from the life they'd tried to build. East, where Thomas had said his brother lived in a town called Silver Creek. East, toward help that might not even exist. But now the horse was dead, and Kathleen could feel her own body failing. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her vision blurred at the edges. James needed feeding, but her milk had nearly dried up from dehydration and stress. The baby's cries were weaker today, and that terrified her more than anything. "Just a little further," she whispered to him, though she didn't believe it herself. "Mama's going to get you somewhere safe. I promise." The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Beautiful, Kathleen thought distantly. Like fire, like blood. She'd always loved sunsets, back when life was gentler, back when Thomas would wrap his arms around her and they'd watch the day end together. Now sunsets just meant darkness was coming, and she had no shelter, no fire, no hope. Her foot caught on a rock and she stumbled, going down hard on one knee. Pain shot through her leg, but she barely felt it. She clutched James tighter, making sure he didn't hit the ground, making sure he was safe even as she failed at everything else. The baby cried out, a thin, weak sound that broke her heart. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mama tried. I tried so hard." She forced herself back to her feet, swaying. The world tilted and spun. 20 more steps, then 10, then 5. Then her legs simply stopped working, and she sank to the ground, her back against a large boulder that jutted from the earth like a gravestone. This was where it would end then. This was where they would die. Kathleen fumbled at her waist, fingers closing around the small pistol Thomas had given her on their wedding day. A Colt pocket revolver, just 5 shots, barely enough to stop a determined man, but all they could afford. She'd never fired it, never wanted to. But she pulled it out now, checked that it was loaded, and held it ready in her lap. If death was coming for her son, it would have to go through her first. The sun sank lower. Shadows stretched long across the prairie. James whimpered against her, and she sang to him soft and broken, a lullaby her own mother had sung. Her voice cracked on every word, but she sang anyway, because what else could she do? What else did she have left to give him? Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's going to buy you a mockingbird. The sound of hoofbeats made her stop. Kathleen's head snapped up, her heart hammering. A rider, coming fast from the north. She couldn't make out details yet. The setting sun was in her eyes. But she could hear the steady rhythm of a horse at full gallop, coming straight toward her. Her hand tightened on the pistol. She raised it, pointing at the approaching figure. Though her arm shook so badly, she wasn't sure she could hit anything, even if she tried. "Stay back," she called out, her voice hoarse and thin. "I'm armed. Stay back!" The rider didn't slow. If anything, the horse seemed to move faster, eating up the distance between them. Kathleen's finger found the trigger. She'd never killed anything in her life, never wanted to, but she would do it now if she had to. For James. Everything for James. "I mean it," she screamed. "I'll shoot!" The rider was close enough now that she could see him clearly. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. There was something on his chest that caught the dying light, something that gleamed like metal. He raised one hand, palm out, in a gesture of peace, but Kathleen didn't lower her weapon. "Ma'am!" The voice was deep, strong, carrying easily across the prairie. "Ma'am, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm Deputy Blackwood from Silver Creek. I'm here to help." A deputy, a lawman. Kathleen wanted to believe him, wanted to collapse with relief, but she'd heard too many stories about men who wore badges they'd stolen or bought, men who preyed on the desperate. She kept the pistol pointed at him, even as her vision swam and her arm trembled. The rider brought his horse to a stop 20 feet away, demonstrating more caution now that he'd seen the gun. He dismounted slowly, hands visible, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understood frightened people. As he stepped forward, Kathleen could see him more clearly in the fading light. He was younger than his voice suggested, perhaps 30, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun. His eyes, even at this distance, were a striking gray, like storm clouds, and they held no malice, only concern. He wore a deputy's badge pinned to his vest, the star catching what little light remained. His gun belt held a well-maintained Colt revolver, but his hand stayed far away from it. "My name is Zachary Blackwood," he said, his voice gentler now, almost soft. "I'm deputy out of Silver Creek, about 15 miles east of here. I was riding the northern patrol when I saw buzzards circling back this way. Figured something was wrong. Ma'am, please, I can see you're hurt. I can see that baby needs help. Let me do my job. Let me get you somewhere safe." Kathleen's arm wavered. 15 miles. 15 miles to safety, to water, to food, to someone who might be able to save James. "How?" Her voice broke. She tried again. "How do I know you're really a deputy?" Zachary reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it up, then took a careful step forward and placed it on the ground before backing away. "That's my commission papers, signed by the territorial marshal. You can check them. I've got no reason to lie to you, ma'am, and every reason to want to help." Kathleen didn't pick up the papers. She couldn't reach them without putting down either James or the gun, and she wasn't willing to do either. But she could see the sincerity in Zachary's face, could hear the genuine concern in his voice. And more than that, she could see his eyes, and they reminded her of Thomas's eyes, kind eyes, honest eyes. The pistol slipped from her fingers, hitting the dirt with a soft thud. "Please," she whispered, and then her voice broke entirely. "Please help my son, please." Zachary moved quickly then, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He knelt beside her, and Kathleen saw his face change as he took in her condition. The cracked lips, the sunken eyes, the way her hands shook as she held her baby. His jaw tightened, and something flickered across his expression that might have been anger, though not at her. "When's the last time you had water?" he asked. "Yesterday morning, maybe. I can't remember." "And the baby?" "I tried to feed him this morning, but there's nothing left. There's nothing left." Zachary's hand went to his canteen immediately. He uncorked it and held it to Kathleen's lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "Not too fast or you'll be sick." The water was warm and tasted faintly of leather, but it was the most beautiful thing Kathleen had ever experienced. She drank as slowly as she could manage, though every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down. After a few sips, Zachary pulled the canteen away despite her small noise of protest. "We'll get more in you once we're moving," he said. "Right now I need to check the baby." "May I?" Kathleen hesitated, then nodded. She was so tired, so impossibly tired. And this man had kind eyes. Zachary took James gently, his large hands surprisingly careful as he unwrapped the quilt. The baby was tiny, frighteningly so, his skin pale and dry. He barely moved, barely made a sound. Zachary's expression grew grim. "He needs a doctor," he said quietly. "And you need rest, food, and water. Silver Creek has all of that. My horse can carry all three of us if we take it slow. Can you ride?" I don't know. I can try." "That's all I need to hear." Zachary wrapped James back in the quilt and stood, offering Kathleen his free hand. She took it, and he pulled her up with surprising gentleness. She swayed immediately, and his arm went around her waist, steadying her. "Easy now. I've got you. Both of you." He helped her to his horse, a sturdy roan mare with intelligent eyes. The animal stood perfectly still as Zachary lifted Kathleen into the saddle. She nearly fell off the other side. Her balance was gone. Everything was spinning, but Zachary was there, holding her steady, murmuring reassurances. "Hold the saddle horn," he instructed. "Just hold on. That's all you need to do." Then he handed James up to her, placing the baby carefully in her arms. The weight of her son grounded her, gave her something to focus on beyond the dizziness and exhaustion. She clutched him close, pressing her face against his fine dark hair, breathing in his scent. Still alive, still breathing, they'd made it this far. Zachary swung up behind her, his arms coming around to grip the reins, effectively bracketing her in safety. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, could feel the strength in the way he held himself. For the first time in days, Kathleen felt something other than terror. She felt safe. "Hold tight," Zachary said softly, his voice close to her ear. "It's going to be dark soon, but I know this trail like my own face. I'll get you home. I promise you that." The horse started forward at a walk, smooth and steady. Behind them, the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, and the first stars began to emerge in a sky that stretched forever. Kathleen let her head rest back against Zachary's shoulder, too exhausted to care about propriety or strangers. James stirred slightly in her arms, and she held him closer. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Zachary didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice carried something deeper than simple duty. "No need for thanks, ma'am. Sometimes we find each other at exactly the moment we're supposed to. Maybe you being on this trail tonight wasn't just accident." Kathleen didn't have the energy to respond, but she thought about his words as the horse carried them through the gathering darkness. Accident or fate, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were alive. What mattered was the steady rhythm of hoofbeats beneath them, the stars above them, and the strong presence of the man who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. They rode in silence for a long time, the prairie night settling around them with its strange symphony of sounds. The whisper of wind through grass, the distant yip of coyotes, the creak of saddle leather. Kathleen drifted in and out of consciousness, jerking awake each time she started to slip sideways, Zachary's arm tightening around her each time to keep her secure. "Easy," he murmured. "I won't let you fall." "I need to stay awake," Kathleen protested weakly. "I need to watch James." "The baby's sleeping. You should too. Rest, ma'am. You're safe now." But Kathleen fought against the exhaustion, afraid that if she closed her eyes, she might never open them again. Instead, she tried to focus on her surroundings, on the man behind her, on anything that would keep her tethered to consciousness. "My name," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. "My name is Kathleen Morgan, and my son is James." "Kathleen," Zachary repeated, and something about the way he said her name made it sound like something precious. "That's a good, strong name, and James is lucky to have a mother who'd fight the whole prairie to keep him safe. I didn't fight hard enough. My husband, Thomas, died 3 days ago. We were trying to reach his brother in Silver Creek, a town called Silver Creek. You said that's where you're from?" She felt Zachary's body tense slightly behind her. "I did. Silver Creek is my home, has been for 5 years now. What was your husband's brother's name? Might be I know him. Joseph. Joseph Morgan. Thomas said he had a farm outside of town. There was a pause, heavy with something Kathleen couldn't quite identify. When Zachary spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. Kathleen, I knew Joseph Morgan. I'm sorry to tell you this, but he passed on about 2 years back. Fever took him one winter. He didn't have any family that I knew of, no children. The farm was sold to pay his debts. The words hit her like a physical blow. Kathleen made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Their destination, the hope that had kept her moving, the reason she dragged herself and James across miles of wilderness, gone. All of it gone. Then we have nothing, she said numbly. Nowhere to go. Nothing left. Now that's not true, Zachary said firmly. You've got your life and your son's life, and those are worth more than anything else. Silver Creek may not have your family waiting, but it's got good people. We'll find you a place to stay, get you on your feet. The town takes care of its own, and as of right now, you're one of ours. You don't understand. I have no money. Thomas and I spent everything on the land rights, on supplies. It all burned. Everything burned. I can't pay for a room, can't pay for food. I have nothing to offer anyone. Then we'll figure it out, Zachary said simply. One thing at a time. First we get you and James to Doc Harmon. Then we get you fed and rested. Then we worry about tomorrow. That's how you survive out here, Kathleen. One day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time. You've already proven you can do that. Kathleen wanted to argue, wanted to explain that he didn't understand the impossible situation she was in, but the words wouldn't come. She was too tired, too heartsick, too utterly defeated. She simply held James closer and let the tears come silently, sliding down her cheeks to disappear into the darkness. Zachary said nothing about her crying. He simply kept the horse moving at that steady, careful pace, his presence solid and undemanding behind her. After a while, he began to talk, not about her situation or her loss, but about other things. About Silver Creek and the people who lived there. About Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house and made the best apple pie in 3 territories. About old Charlie Goodwin, who told wild stories at the saloon every Saturday night. About the church with its white steeple that could be seen from 5 miles away. He painted a picture with words, building up this town she'd never seen, making it real and alive in her imagination. And slowly, gradually, Kathleen felt something tiny and fragile unfold in her chest, something that might have been hope. The moon rose, a bright silver disk that illuminated the prairie in shades of gray and black. By its light, Kathleen could see they were following a defined trail now, rutted by wagon wheels and marked by occasional cairns of stacked stones. Civilization. They were getting close to civilization. Almost there, Zachary said, as if reading her thoughts. See that rise ahead? Once we crest that, you'll be able to see the town lights. Another half hour at most. True to his word, when they topped the gentle hill, Kathleen could see a scattering of warm yellow lights in the distance. Silver Creek. It looked impossibly small from here, just a handful of buildings clustered together against the vast darkness of the plains. But to Kathleen, it looked like salvation. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's home, Zachary replied, and starting tonight, it's your home too. They descended the hill, and the lights grew closer, resolving into individual structures. Kathleen could make out a main street with buildings on either side, windows glowing softly. There were people still out despite the late hour. She could see silhouettes moving past lit windows, could hear the distant sound of a piano playing somewhere. Life. Normal, ordinary life. As they entered the town, a few people stopped to stare at the unusual sight of Deputy Blackwood riding double with a woman and a baby. Zachary nodded to them, but didn't stop, guiding his horse directly to a 2-story building with a sign out front that read, Dr. William Harmon, Physician. He dismounted first, then reached up to take James from Kathleen's arms. She released her son reluctantly, watching as Zachary cradled the baby with the same careful gentleness he'd shown before. Then he offered his hand to help her down. Kathleen swung her leg over the saddle, but the moment her feet touched the ground, her legs buckled. She would have fallen if Zachary hadn't been there, moving fast to catch her, his free arm going around her waist. "I've got you," he said again, and Kathleen was starting to believe it. He helped her up the steps to the doctor's office and pushed through the door without knocking. The front room was a small waiting area with several chairs and a desk where an older woman sat reading by lamplight. She looked up at their entrance, her eyes widening. "Zachary, what on earth?" "Need Doc Harmon, Mrs. Harmon. Right now. This woman and her baby, they're in bad shape. Dehydration, exhaustion, maybe more." The woman, Mrs. Harmon apparently, was already on her feet and moving toward a door at the back of the room. "William," she called. "William, we've got an emergency." A moment later, a man emerged wearing shirt sleeves and spectacles, gray-haired but moving with quick efficiency. He took one look at Kathleen and James and pointed toward an examination room. "Bring them through here." "Zachary, what happened?" "Found them on the northern prairie. Horse was dead. They were on foot. The woman hasn't had water in more than a day, maybe longer. Baby's not nursing properly." Dr. Harmon was already examining James, his hands gentle but thorough as he unwrapped the quilt. Kathleen tried to watch, tried to stay alert, but the warm room and the relief of finally being safe was making it impossible to stay conscious. Her eyes kept drifting closed. "Kathleen," Zachary's voice cut through the fog. "The doctor needs you to stay awake a bit longer. Can you do that?" She forced her eyes open and nodded weakly. Dr. Harmon was listening to James's chest with a stethoscope, his expression serious but not panicked. "The baby's stable," he said after a moment. "Dehydrated but not critical. We'll get some water into him, see if we can get him nursing again. Mrs. Morgan, have you been able to produce milk?" "A little," Kathleen managed. "Not much, not enough. We'll work on that. Get your fluids back up, get some food in you, and your body will respond. Margaret," he called to his wife, "can you prepare a room upstairs? This young lady is going to be our guest for a few days while we get her and the baby back to health." "Of course. I'll make up the guest room right away." Kathleen tried to protest. "I can't. I don't have money to pay you." Dr. Harmon waved this away with obvious impatience. "We'll sort that out later. Right now, my job is to keep you and this baby alive, and I intend to do exactly that. Now let's get you lying down before you fall down." He guided her to an examination table and helped her lie back. The moment her head hit the pillow, Kathleen felt the last of her strength drain away. She watched through half-closed eyes as Mrs. Harmon returned with a glass of water and what looked like broth. The doctor held James while his wife helped Kathleen drink, small, careful sips that she had to force down past the lump in her throat. Zachary stood near the door, his hat in his hands, watching with an expression that Kathleen couldn't quite read. There was concern there, certainly, but something else too. Something deeper, almost protective. As if he'd already decided that she and James were his responsibility and he wouldn't rest until he knew they were safe. "Zachary," Dr. Harmon said, not looking up from his examination of James, "you can go. We'll take good care of them. I'll send word to the boarding house if there's any change in their condition." But Zachary didn't move toward the door. "If it's all the same to you, Doc, I'd like to stay a while. Make sure they're settled." Dr. Harmon glanced at him, one eyebrow raised, then shared a look with his wife that seemed to communicate volumes. "Suit yourself. Margaret, why don't you show Deputy Blackwood where the coffee is? This is going to take a while." Mrs. Harmon led Zachary out of the examination room, but not before he caught Kathleen's eye one more time. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "Both of you. I promise." Then he was gone, and Kathleen was left with the doctor and her son and the overwhelming relief of survival. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, listening to Dr. Harmon's calm voice as he continued his examination, feeling the gentle ministrations of his hands as he checked her pulse, her eyes, her reflexes. "You're a strong woman, Mrs. Morgan," he said at one point. "Not many could have done what you did, walking that prairie with a baby, no water, no food. Your son is alive because of your strength." "I didn't feel strong," Kathleen whispered. "I felt like I was dying." "Sometimes those are the same thing," Dr. Harmon replied. "The strength to keep going even when dying would be easier. That's the strongest thing there is." Over the next hour, Dr. Harmon worked methodically. He got more fluids into Kathleen, checked James thoroughly, and declared them both likely to make full recoveries with proper rest and nutrition. Mrs. Harmon brought clean clothes for both of them, simple but serviceable garments that smelled of lavender and sunshine. She helped Kathleen change and wash, her touch maternal and kind. asking no questions about what had happened or where Kathleen had come from. Finally, when Kathleen was clean and dressed, and James had been fed a little sugar water from a medicine dropper, Mrs. Harmon led them upstairs to a small bedroom with a comfortable bed and a cradle by the window. Someone, probably Zachary, had already brought up Kathleen's small bundle of possessions that had survived the fire. "You rest now," Mrs. Harmon said, helping Kathleen into bed. "I'll be right downstairs if you need anything. That bell pull by the bed, you just tug on that, and I'll come running." Kathleen wanted to thank her, wanted to express the overwhelming gratitude that was choking her, but the words wouldn't come. She simply nodded and reached for James as Mrs. Harmon placed him in her arms. The baby was already sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling with regular breaths. Alive. Still alive. Mrs. Harmon dimmed the lamp and moved toward the door, then paused. "Deputy Blackwood is still downstairs," she said softly. "He won't leave until he knows you're settled. That man hasn't shown that kind of concern for anyone since, well, in a very long time. You must have made quite an impression." Before Kathleen could respond to this cryptic statement, Mrs. Harmon was gone, closing the door quietly behind her. The room fell into peaceful silence, broken only by James's soft breathing and the distant sound of voices from downstairs. Kathleen lay in the darkness, holding her son, letting the reality of survival slowly sink in. They'd made it. Against all odds, despite everything that had happened, they'd made it to safety. And it was all because of a man with storm-gray eyes and a kind heart, a man who'd appeared on the prairie like an answer to a prayer. Deputy Zachary Blackwood. She whispered his name into the darkness, testing how it felt on her tongue. A good name. A strong name. The name of a man who'd saved their lives without hesitation, who'd offered help without asking for anything in return. Downstairs, she could hear the low rumble of male voices. Zachary and Dr. Harmon, discussing something she couldn't quite make out. She found herself straining to hear, wanting to know what they were saying, wanting to understand more about this man who'd literally carried her to safety. But exhaustion was pulling her down, deeper and deeper into darkness. Her eyes drifted closed. Her arms loosened slightly around James, though not enough to endanger him. And as sleep finally claimed her, Kathleen's last conscious thought was of storm-gray eyes and a voice that promised safety. In the doctor's office below, Zachary sat with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. Dr. Harmon watched him with the assessing gaze of a man who'd seen a lot of life and missed very little. "You did a good thing tonight, Zachary," the doctor said quietly. Zachary shook his head. "Just doing my job. I'm a deputy. Protecting people is what I do." "Is that all it was?" Dr. Harmon's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. "Because I've seen you bring in people who needed help before, and you've never once asked to stay until they were settled. Never once looked at them the way you looked at that woman and her baby." Zachary's jaw tightened. He stared into his coffee cup as if it held answers. "She was in trouble. They both were. I couldn't just what? Right away? Of course you couldn't. That's not who you are." Dr. Harmon leaned back in his chair. "But this is different, and we both know it. You saw something out there on that prairie, something that got under your skin." "I saw a woman protecting her baby with everything she had left," Zachary said quietly. "I saw courage. Real courage. Not the kind that comes from a gun or a badge. The kind that comes from love. And I saw—" He stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter what I saw." "Doesn't it?" Dr. Harmon stood and moved to refill his own coffee cup. "Zachary, you've been dead inside since your sister's family passed. Don't think we haven't noticed. You do your job. You're fair and honest and brave when you need to be, but there's no life in you. Haven't seen you smile in 2 years. Haven't seen you show interest in much of anything beyond the next patrol, the next arrest, the next day to get through." Zachary's hands tightened around his cup. "What's your point, Doc?" "My point is that tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I saw something in your eyes besides duty and guilt. I saw you care about something again. About someone. Maybe 2 someones." Dr. Harmon returned to his seat. "That woman upstairs has lost everything. Her husband, her home, her future. She's got nothing but a baby and the clothes Margaret loaned her. She's going to need help, Zachary. A lot of help. The question is, are you prepared to give it? Zachary was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the town was settling into sleep, the last lights going out in windows up and down the street. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else a baby cried. Not James, but some other child, safe in its home, surrounded by family. I don't know, he finally admitted. When I saw her out there, when I saw her holding that gun with hands that could barely hold it, ready to die protecting her son, Doc, it did something to me. Made me feel something I haven't felt in so long, I'd forgotten what it was like. And what was that? Like there was a reason to keep going. Like maybe I could do more than just exist. Like maybe... Zachary looked up, his storm gray eyes haunted but no longer empty. Like maybe I could have a purpose again beyond just surviving. Dr. Harmon nodded slowly. Then I suggest you figure out what you want to do about that. Because that woman is going to wake up tomorrow morning in a strange town with no family, no money, and a baby to provide for. She's going to need friends. She's going to need people who care. And something tells me you might just be the person to help her find her footing. Zachary stood, setting his untouched coffee on the desk. I should go. It's late, and I've got early patrol tomorrow. You're welcome to sleep on the couch here if you'd rather not ride back to your place in the dark. Thanks, but I'll head home. Zachary moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. Doc, when she wakes up tomorrow, tell her I'll come by. Tell her she's not alone in this. I'll tell her, Dr. Harmon promised. But Zachary, you might want to think about what that means. Telling someone they're not alone, that's a promise. That's a commitment. Make sure you're ready for it before you make it. Zachary nodded slowly, settled his hat on his head, and stepped out into the night. The air was cool and clean, filled with the smell of prairie grass and the distant promise of dawn. His horse waited patiently at the hitching rail, and he mounted up, turning toward the small cabin he called home on the edge of town. But as he rode through the quiet streets, his mind wasn't on sleep or patrol schedules or any of the 100 other things he usually thought about. Instead, he kept seeing Kathleen's face, pale and drawn with exhaustion, but fierce with determination. Kept hearing her voice as she begged him to save her son, kept feeling the weight of her leaning against him as they rode, trusting him completely with her life and her child's life. And for the first time in 2 years since the fire that took his sister Rachel and her husband and their 2 children, Zachary Blackwood felt something crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. Not breaking open, not yet, but cracking, letting in just a sliver of light, a tiny fragment of hope. Maybe, he thought, as stars wheeled overhead and his horse carried him home. Maybe there was more to life than guilt and duty. Maybe there was still room for something else, something like purpose, something like connection, something like family. He rode on into the darkness, not knowing that upstairs in Dr. Harmon's guest room, Kathleen Morgan was dreaming of storm-gray eyes and strong arms and a voice that promised safety, not knowing that a single moment on a darkening prairie had set in motion something neither of them could have predicted or prepared for, not knowing that sometimes fate put people exactly where they needed to be at exactly the right moment, and that sometimes second chances came riding out of the sunset with a badge and a broken heart, looking for something to protect, something to save, something to believe in again. Morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the guest room, painting golden patterns across the wooden floor. Kathleen woke slowly, disoriented by the softness of the mattress beneath her and the unfamiliar sounds of a waking town. Voices calling greetings, the rattle of wagon wheels on hard-packed dirt, the cheerful clang of a blacksmith's hammer somewhere in the distance. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten here. Then James stirred in her arms, making the small mewling sound that meant he was hungry, and everything came flooding back. The prairie, the dying horse, the gun in her trembling hand, and Zachary Blackwood, appearing out of the sunset like something from a dream. She sat up carefully, her body protesting with 1,000 small aches. Through the window, she could see Silver Creek in full daylight, a modest frontier town with a wide main street lined with wooden buildings, their false fronts painted in cheerful colors. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their morning business. Normal life. The kind of life she'd thought she'd lost forever. A soft knock at the door made her start. "Mrs. Morgan, are you awake, dear?" Mrs. Harmon's voice was gentle, concerned. Yes, please come in. The doctor's wife entered carrying a tray laden with food, eggs, toast, jam, bacon, and a pot of tea that smelled like heaven. Behind her came a younger woman, perhaps 20, with auburn hair and a friendly smile, carrying a pitcher of water and fresh linens. This is my niece, Sarah, Mrs. Harmon said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. She helps us around the office. We thought you might want some breakfast and a proper wash. How are you feeling this morning? Sore, Kathleen admitted, but better, so much better. I don't know how to thank you for... Mrs. Harmon waved away her gratitude with a flour-dusted hand. Nonsense. You just focus on getting your strength back. That little one needs a healthy mother. She moved to the window and drew back the curtains fully, letting in more light. Deputy Blackwood was here at dawn asking after you. Told him you were still sleeping, but he said to tell you he'd be back this afternoon. Seemed quite concerned. Kathleen felt heat rise in her cheeks at the mention of Zachary's name, which was absurd. The man had saved her life. Of course he'd want to know she was recovering. It didn't mean anything beyond simple human decency. But as she ate the breakfast Mrs. Harmon had brought, she found her thoughts returning to him again and again. The steadiness of his voice, the gentleness of his hands, the way he'd held her on that horse, his presence solid and reassuring behind her. She barely knew him, yet she felt drawn to him in a way she couldn't quite explain. Sarah helped her wash and dress in a simple blue calico dress that Mrs. Harmon had provided from the church donation barrel, the older woman explained. Folks around here are generous with those in need. Then Dr. Harmon came up to examine both her and James, declaring them both improved but ordering another full day of rest. Your milk is coming back already, he told her after checking James. That's good. Keep drinking plenty of water and eating regular meals. By tomorrow, you should be able to nurse him properly again. Dr. Harmon, I need to discuss payment, Kathleen said, her voice firm despite her nervousness. I have no money right now, but I can work. I can clean, I can cook, We'll sort it out, the doctor interrupted gently. Right now, your job is to heal. Everything else can wait. But Kathleen couldn't let it wait. After the doctor left, after Mrs. Harmon had taken the breakfast tray away, she sat by the window holding James and facing the reality of her situation. She was a widow with no money, no family, and a 3-month-old baby in a town where she knew no one except the people who'd shown her charity. She needed work, needed income, needed a way to stand on her own feet. The thought of being dependent on others' kindness made her stomach churn with anxiety. She'd been raised to work for what she got, to earn her way. Thomas had been the same. They'd built their life together through hard work and determination, and even though that life was gone now, even though Thomas was gone, she still had her hands and her mind and her will. She would find a way. She had to. Around noon, there was another knock at her door. This time, it was a woman Kathleen hadn't met yet, older, perhaps 50, with kind eyes and graying hair tucked under a practical bonnet. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Mrs. Morgan? I'm Eleanor Henderson. I run the boarding house here in Silver Creek. She set the basket on the table and smiled warmly. I brought you some things I thought you might need. Soap, hairbrush, a few other sundries, and some gingerbread, my own recipe. Mrs. Henderson, that's very kind, but I can't accept... Of course you can. Eleanor settled herself in the chair by the window with the air of someone prepared to stay a while. Now, I heard from Margaret Harmon that you might be looking for work once you're back on your feet. Is that true? Kathleen nodded, hope flickering in her chest. Yes. I'll do anything honest. I'm a hard worker. I promise you that. Eleanor studied her for a moment, her gaze assessing but not unkind. Can you read and write, dear? Yes, ma'am. My mother was a teacher back in Pennsylvania. She made sure I had a proper education. Arithmetic, history, geography, all of it. I even helped my mother with her younger students sometimes. A smile spread across Eleanor's face. Well now, isn't that providential? You see, Silver Creek's been without a proper school teacher for near on 6 months. Miss Patricia ran off to get married to a cavalry officer, and we've been making do with parents taking turns teaching their children, but it's not ideal. The town council has been looking for someone qualified to take the position. Kathleen's heart began to pound. A teaching position, respectable work, the kind of work her mother had done. Work that would provide income and purpose and a place in the community. But surely they'd want someone with references, she said hesitantly. Someone established. I'm just a widow passing through. References can be worked around, especially when there's a need as pressing as ours. We've got near 20 children of school age and more coming as the town grows. Most of the parents are getting desperate for proper education for their young ones. Eleanor leaned forward. Now, I can't promise anything, but if you're interested, I could arrange for you to meet with Mayor Thornton and Reverend Walsh. They head up the school committee. Would you be willing? Yes, Kathleen said immediately. Yes, absolutely. When? Let's give you another day to recover. Then, say, day after tomorrow? I'll spread the word, get things arranged. Eleanor stood, gathering her bonnet. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay here with the Harmons, or if you'd prefer, I have a small room at the boarding house. Ground floor, quiet, perfect for you and the little one. No charge until you're settled. Mrs. Henderson, I can't keep accepting charity. It's not charity, dear. It's community. That's how we survive out here. We help each other, and when we can, we pay it forward. Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. Deputy Blackwood spoke to me this morning, asked me to look out for you, help if I could. That man doesn't ask for favors often, but when he does, people listen. He's got the respect of everyone in Silver Creek. After Eleanor left, Kathleen sat in stunned silence. A teaching position, a room at the boarding house, a chance to build something here, to create a life for herself and James. It seemed too good to be true, too easy after everything had been so impossibly hard. And Zachary had helped arrange it, had spoken to Mrs. Henderson on her behalf, had used his influence in the town to smooth her path. Why would he do that? They were strangers. He'd done his duty by rescuing her and bringing her to safety. He owed her nothing more. Yet clearly he felt differently. The afternoon passed slowly. James nursed better than he had in days, strengthened by the sugar water and by Kathleen's recovering health. She dozed in the chair by the window, letting the sounds of the town wash over her, trying to imagine herself as part of it. Teaching children, living in a boarding house room, building a new life in Silver Creek. It was terrifying and exciting in equal measure. Around 3 o'clock, she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, followed by Mrs. Harmon's voice. She's awake, Deputy. Go on up. Kathleen's pulse quickened. She smoothed down her borrowed dress, patted her hair, which Sarah had helped her wash and braid that morning, and tried to look composed, as if her heart wasn't suddenly racing, as if she hadn't been thinking about storm-gray eyes all day. Zachary knocked softly before entering, removing his hat as he stepped through the door. In full daylight, Kathleen could see him more clearly than she had in the darkness of their first meeting. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. His face was weathered but handsome, with strong features and those remarkable gray eyes that seemed to see everything. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his shirt, and there was a scar along his jaw that she hadn't noticed before. He looked every inch the frontier lawman, strong, capable, dangerous if he needed to be. But when he looked at her, his expression softened into something gentle, almost vulnerable. Mrs. Morgan, he said, his voice that same deep rumble she remembered. It's good to see you looking better. How are you feeling? Much better, thanks to you. Kathleen gestured to the chair Eleanor had vacated. Please, sit down. I owe you my life, Deputy Blackwood, my son's life. I don't know how to repay such a debt. Zachary sat, his large frame making the delicate chair look like children's furniture. He set his hat on his knee and fixed her with those steady gray eyes. There's no debt, ma'am. I did what anyone would do. That's not true, and we both know it. You could have ridden past. Many men would have. But you stopped. You helped. You brought us here and made sure we were cared for. Kathleen held James a little closer. You saved us. That means something. A faint color rose in Zachary's cheeks, as if he was uncomfortable with praise. Well, I'm just glad I was on that patrol route. Hate to think what might have happened if... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both knew what would have happened. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with too many unspoken things. Finally, Zachary cleared his throat. I spoke with Eleanor Henderson this morning. She mentioned you might be interested in the teaching position. Yes, very much, but I don't want to presume. I'm sure there are others more qualified. There aren't, Zachary interrupted. You'd be doing the town a favor. The children need a teacher, and from what Eleanor tells me, you're more than qualified. I haven't taught a formal class before, just helped my mother occasionally. That's more experience than most folks out here have. Silver Creek isn't exactly drowning in educated people. He leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Morgan, Kathleen, if I may, I want you to know that whatever you need to get settled here, you've got help. You're not alone in this. There it was again, that promise of not being alone. The same thing Dr. Harmon had said Zachary told him to pass along. Kathleen studied his face, trying to understand what drove this man to care so much about a stranger. Why? She asked softly. Why do you care what happens to us? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hat, his fingers tracing the brim. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost rough with emotion. 2 years ago, I lost my sister and her family in a fire. Warehouse fire in Denver. They lived in rooms above it. Rachel, her husband Tom, and their 2 children, Emily and Daniel. Emily was 4. Daniel was just a baby, not much older than your James. He paused, swallowed hard. I was supposed to be there that week, was supposed to help Tom with some repairs, but I took an extra patrol assignment instead, wanted the pay. When I got the telegram about the fire, I rode for 3 days straight to get to Denver, but by the time I arrived, he stopped, his jaw working, his eyes fixed on something far away that only he could see. I'm so sorry, Kathleen whispered, her heart breaking for him. I blame myself. Still do, if I'm honest. If I'd been there, maybe I could have gotten them out. Maybe things would have been different. I've spent the last 2 years just existing, doing my job, keeping the peace, but not really living, not feeling much of anything. He looked up at her then, and his eyes were filled with something raw and honest. Then I saw you out on that prairie, saw you holding that gun with the last of your strength, ready to die, protecting your son. And something in me just woke up. Made me realize that maybe I could still do something that mattered. Maybe I could help someone when it counted. Kathleen felt tears prick her eyes. She understood loss, understood guilt, understood the weight of wondering if you could have done something different, something more. You did help, she said firmly. You saved us. And I think maybe we saved you a little bit too. Gave you something to fight for again. Zachary's expression softened, a small smile touching his lips, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. Maybe you did at that, he admitted. They sat together as afternoon light shifted across the room, talking more easily now. Zachary told her about Silver Creek, about the people she'd meet, about the school building that sat empty, waiting for a teacher. Kathleen told him about her life before, about Thomas and their dreams of homesteading, about her mother's dedication to education, about the journey west that had ended in tragedy. Do you have any family back east? Zachary asked. No, my parents died when I was 19. Thomas's parents passed before we married. We were each other's family. She looked down at James, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. Now it's just us. Just me and my son. That's not entirely true anymore, Zachary said quietly. You've got friends here now, people who'll help you, and he hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. And you've got me. If you'll have me as a friend, that is. The way he said it, the tentative hope in his voice, made Kathleen's heart squeeze. This strong, capable man who'd saved her life was offering friendship with the uncertainty of someone who'd been alone too long. I'd like that very much, she said. I'd like to be friends, Deputy Blackwood. Zachary, he corrected gently. Friends call each other by their given names. Then you should call me Kathleen. Kathleen, he repeated, and again there was something in the way he said her name that made it sound precious. It suits you, strong and dignified. Before Kathleen could respond, there was a commotion downstairs, raised voices, the sound of the front door banging open, Dr. Harmon's calm tones trying to soothe someone. Zachary was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the gun at his hip, his body moving between Kathleen and the door in an instinctive protective gesture. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs, and then a woman burst into the room. She was perhaps 30, thin to the point of gauntness, with dark hair coming loose from its pins and eyes that were red from crying. Her dress was travel-stained, and her hands shook as she gripped the doorframe. "Zachary," she gasped. "Oh God, Zachary, they said you were here. I came as soon as I got your telegram. I wasn't sure if you'd really want to see me after." Zachary stood frozen, his face going pale. "Caroline," he breathed, "what are you doing here?" The woman, Caroline, let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You sent me a telegram saying you needed me to come to Silver Creek, that it was important. What was I supposed to do? Ignore it?" "I sent you a telegram?" Zachary looked genuinely confused. Then understanding dawned across his face, followed quickly by something that looked like betrayal. "Eleanor. Eleanor must have sent it in my name." "What? Why would Mrs. Henderson do that?" Kathleen asked, completely lost. Zachary ran a hand through his hair, looking more rattled than Kathleen had seen him. "Because she's a meddling busybody who thinks she knows what's best for everyone." He turned back to Caroline, his voice softening. "I'm sorry. I didn't send for you. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me after everything." Caroline's face crumpled. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Not want to hear from you? Zachary, you're my brother, my only family. Just because things have been difficult between us doesn't mean I don't—" She couldn't finish, overcome with emotion. Kathleen watched this exchange with growing understanding. This was Zachary's sister, the one who'd lost her family in the fire, the one he'd been estranged from for 2 years, and somehow Mrs. Henderson had taken it upon herself to bring them back together. Dr. Harmon appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. I tried to explain the situation to Miss Blackwood, but she was quite insistent on seeing her brother immediately. My apologies for the disruption. "It's fine, Doc," Zachary said, though his voice was strained. "Caroline, we need to talk. But not here. Kathleen needs her rest." "No," Kathleen said firmly, surprising herself. "Stay, both of you. If Mrs. Henderson went to the trouble of bringing you together, there must be a reason." She looked at Caroline, seeing the grief and longing in the other woman's eyes, recognizing it because she'd felt it herself. "Please, sit down. You look exhausted." Caroline hesitated, glancing between Kathleen and Zachary. "I don't want to intrude. I don't even know who you are." "My name is Kathleen Morgan. Your brother saved my life and my son's life 2 days ago. We owe him everything." Kathleen kept her voice gentle but insistent. "And from the look on your face, you need to talk to him as much as he needs to talk to you. So please, sit down." Something in Kathleen's tone must have reached Caroline, because the other woman slowly moved into the room and sank into the chair Zachary had vacated. Zachary himself remained standing, his body tense, his face carefully neutral. "How have you been?" Caroline asked quietly, her eyes fixed on her brother's face with an intensity that spoke of 2 years' worth of worry and wondering. "Getting by," Zachary said. "Working, keeping busy." "That's not what I asked." "It's the best answer I've got." Caroline flinched as if he'd struck her. "Zach, please, don't shut me out. Not again. Not after all this time." "I'm not shutting you out. You're the one who—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "This isn't the time or place." "Then when?" Caroline's voice rose, edged with desperation. "When is the time, Zachary? It's been 2 years, 2 years since the fire, 2 years since we buried Rachel and Tom and the children, 2 years since you looked at me and said it should have been you in that warehouse, and I said—" Her voice broke. "I said things I didn't mean. Things I've regretted every single day since." The room fell silent except for Caroline's ragged breathing. Kathleen felt like an intruder on this private pain, but she couldn't look away. Couldn't stop herself from witnessing this raw moment between siblings who'd been broken by loss. "You meant them," Zachary said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You meant them, Caroline, and you were right. It should have been me. I'm the one who chose money over family. I'm the one who wasn't there when they needed me." No. Caroline stood abruptly, closing the distance between them. She was several inches shorter than her brother, but she stood toe to toe with him, fierce and trembling. No, Zachary, I was wrong. I was drowning in grief and anger, and I lashed out at the person closest to me. I blamed you because it was easier than accepting that sometimes terrible things just happen, that sometimes there's no one to blame, no way to change what's already done. Caroline, let me finish. She grabbed his arms, forcing him to look at her. I've spent 2 years living with what I said to you. 2 years wanting to take it back, but being too proud and too ashamed to reach out. When I got that telegram, even though I was confused about why you'd suddenly contact me, I was so grateful. So desperately grateful for a chance to see you again, to tell you I'm sorry. Tears were sliding down Zachary's face now, though he made no sound. Kathleen's own eyes were wet as she watched brother and sister finally break through the wall of guilt and grief that had separated them. I'm sorry too, Zachary said hoarsely, for not being there, for letting you down, for staying away these past 2 years when I should have been checking on you, making sure you were all right. We both stayed away, Caroline whispered. We both let pride and pain keep us apart. But maybe whoever sent that telegram did us a favor. Maybe it's time we stopped punishing ourselves and each other for something neither of us could control. James chose that moment to wake with a small cry, breaking the tension in the room. Kathleen immediately shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back, murmuring soft reassurances. When she looked up, she found both Zachary and Caroline staring at the baby with identical expressions of mingled pain and longing. How old is he? Caroline asked, her voice thick. 3 months, Kathleen replied. His name is James. Caroline moved closer, drawn as if by an invisible thread. Could I hold him? Kathleen glanced at Zachary, who gave a small nod. She carefully transferred James into Caroline's waiting arms. The other woman held him as if he were made of glass, her whole body trembling. He's beautiful, Caroline breathed. He looks so much like... She stopped, swallowed. Daniel would have been about 2 now, if he'd lived. I know, Kathleen said softly. Zachary told me. I'm so sorry for your loss. Caroline looked up at her brother, tears streaming freely now. When I hold him, I can almost remember what it felt like. Before the fire. When Rachel would let me hold Daniel, and Emily would climb in my lap, and everything was... She couldn't finish. Zachary moved to his sister's side, his large hand gentle on her shoulder. I know, he said, his own voice breaking. I know, Caro. I feel it too. They stood together, the 3 of them, connected by loss and grief and the small living weight of an infant who represented both what they'd lost and what they might still have. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, and somewhere in Silver Creek, Eleanor Henderson was probably congratulating herself on her matchmaking, both romantic and familial. Dr. Harmon appeared in the doorway again, this time with his wife beside him. I hate to interrupt, he said gently, but I think we should let Mrs. Morgan rest, and perhaps Miss Blackwood could use some refreshment and a place to stay. We've got another room upstairs if... She'll stay with me, Zachary said immediately. I've got space at my cabin. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and there's a spare room. He looked at Caroline. If you're willing, that is. If you don't mind staying out on the edge of town. Caroline carefully handed James back to Kathleen, her fingers lingering for just a moment on the baby's soft hair. I'd like that, she said to her brother. I'd like that very much. Then it settled. Mrs. Harmon bustled forward, ever practical. Caroline, dear, why don't you come downstairs with me and we'll get you some tea while Zachary says his goodbyes. You both look like you could use a moment to collect yourselves. Caroline followed Mrs. Harmon out, pausing at the door to look back at her brother one more time. The look that passed between them was complicated, years of hurt and healing mixed together. But there was hope in it too. Real, tangible hope. After they'd gone, Zachary sank into the chair, all the strength seeming to drain out of him at once. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Kathleen shifted James to one arm and reached out with the other, placing her hand on Zachary's shoulder. She didn't say anything. Sometimes there were no words that could help. Sometimes all you could do was be present, be steady, let someone know they weren't alone in their pain. After a long moment, Zachary raised his head. His eyes were red but clearer somehow, as if the tears had washed away some of the burden he'd been carrying. "Thank you," he said, "for letting her stay, for encouraging us to talk." "You needed each other," Kathleen said simply. "Family is too precious to waste. I learned that when I lost mine." "Eleanor Henderson is going to be insufferably pleased with herself," Zachary said, and there was a hint of dry humor in his voice now. Kathleen laughed softly. "She seems like the type, but I think her heart was in the right place." "It usually is. Doesn't make her any less of a meddler." Zachary stood, collecting his hat. "I should go, let you rest. But Kathleen, I'm glad you're here. Glad you're going to stay in Silver Creek. I think you being here might be good for all of us." "I hope so," Kathleen said. "I really hope so." After Zachary left, taking Caroline with him, the house fell quiet. Mrs. Harmon brought up a light supper and helped Kathleen settle in for the night. As darkness fell outside and the town grew quiet, Kathleen lay in bed with James sleeping beside her, thinking about the strange turns fate could take. 3 days ago, she'd been prepared to die on the prairie. Now she was in a warm bed in a friendly town, with the promise of work and a new life opening before her. And somehow, in the middle of all that, she'd become entangled with a broken family trying to heal, with a man whose storm-gray eyes held too much pain and too much kindness in equal measure. She didn't know where any of this was leading, didn't know if she'd succeed as a teacher, if she'd be able to make a life here, if the fragile connection she was forming would hold or shatter. But for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. 2 days later, Kathleen stood in the small schoolhouse on the eastern edge of Silver Creek, facing Mayor Thornton and Reverend Walsh across a scarred wooden desk. She'd spent the previous day preparing for this meeting, borrowing books from Dr. Harmon's modest library and reviewing lessons from her childhood. Mrs. Henderson had loaned her a proper dress, dark green with a white collar, suitable for a teacher, and Sarah had helped arrange her hair in a neat bun. Now, as the two men peppered her with questions about grammar and arithmetic and discipline, Kathleen drew on every scrap of knowledge her mother had given her. She explained her philosophy of education, that children learned best through encouragement rather than fear, through engagement rather than rote memorization. She demonstrated her ability to work complex mathematical problems and to parse difficult sentences. She even recited from memory several poems by Wordsworth and Longfellow. Mayor Thornton, a portly man with impressive mutton chops, exchanged glances with Reverend Walsh, a thin, scholarly-looking man with wire-rimmed spectacles. "Mrs. Morgan," the Reverend said carefully, "your credentials are impressive, but we must be frank. You're new to Silver Creek, and you have a young infant. Some parents might question whether you can manage both teaching and motherhood effectively." Kathleen had expected this. She met his gaze steadily. "Reverend Walsh, with respect, women have been managing multiple responsibilities since the beginning of time. My son will be with me in the schoolroom. He's still nursing, so I have little choice in that, but I assure you he will not interfere with my teaching. As for being new to town, everyone is new somewhere at some time. I can provide you with an education your children desperately need, or you can continue waiting for someone more established who may never come." Mayor Thornton's eyebrows rose. Reverend Walsh looked taken aback. Then, slowly, both men began to smile. "Well spoken," Mayor Thornton said. "We appreciate plainness and honesty here. Mrs. Morgan, if you're willing, the position is yours. $20 a month, plus use of the small cottage behind the schoolhouse. It's modest, but it's sound. Classes begin Monday next, if that gives you enough time to prepare." Kathleen's knees nearly buckled with relief. $20 a month. A cottage. Real work that she loved. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you so much. I won't let you down." "See that you don't," Reverend Walsh said, but his tone was kind. "Silver Creek's children are precious to us. We're trusting you with their futures." As Kathleen left the schoolhouse, she found Zachary waiting outside, leaning against the porch rail. He straightened when he saw her, and she realized he'd been there the whole time, waiting to hear the outcome. "Well?" he asked. "I got it," Kathleen said, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time, all the tension of the past week pouring out of her. "I got the position. I start Monday." Zachary's face split into a genuine grin. transforming him once again into someone younger and lighter. "That's wonderful. Congratulations, Kathleen. Walk with me?" she asked impulsively. "I'd like to see the cottage, and I'd like the company." They walked together through Silver Creek, James sleeping peacefully in Kathleen's arms. Zachary pointed out various establishments, the general store, the saloon, the telegraph office. People nodded greetings as they passed, curious eyes following the widow and the deputy, but most faces were friendly. The cottage behind the schoolhouse was small but charming. Just 2 rooms, a main living area with a stove and a separate bedroom. It needed cleaning and the windows needed washing, but it was sound and dry, and it would be theirs. Kathleen stood in the doorway, imagining it with curtains and furniture, imagining James growing up here, imagining herself teaching children and building a life. "I can help you fix it up," Zachary offered. "Caroline, too. She's been looking for something to do with her hands, something to occupy her mind. She's good with decorating, always was." "How is she?" Kathleen asked. "How are things between you two?" "Better," Zachary admitted. "Not perfect, not yet. We've got years of hurt to work through, but we're talking again. That's something." He leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "She's been asking about you, actually. Wants to know if she can help with James sometimes. She was always good with children." Kathleen considered this. She'd only met Caroline briefly, but she'd seen the longing in the other woman's eyes when she held James. "I'd like that," she decided. "I think it might be good for both of us. And James could use more people in his life who care about him." "He's got that already," Zachary said quietly. "More than you might realize." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of the growing connection between them. A recognition that what had started as a rescue was becoming something deeper. Kathleen felt her heart skip, felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she looked away first. "I should get back to the Harmons," she said. "I need to start preparing lessons for Monday. I'll walk you back." They made their way through town as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and crimson. As they reached Dr. Harmon's office, Zachary caught her arm gently. "Kathleen, I want you to know, whatever you need, whatever James needs, I'm here. You've got a friend in this town. You've got me." Kathleen looked up at him, at this strong, damaged, achingly kind man who'd saved her life and then refused to stop caring. "I know," she said softly, "and I'm grateful, more than I can say." Then, on impulse, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. It was brief, chaste, nothing more than a gesture of gratitude and affection. But when she pulled back, she saw something flare in Zachary's eyes, surprise, pleasure, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Good night, Zachary," she whispered. "Good night, Kathleen." She carried James inside, but before she closed the door, she looked back. Zachary still stood there, his hand touching the spot where she'd kissed him, his expression wondering. When he saw her watching, he smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face, and tipped his hat to her. Kathleen closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. This was dangerous, she knew. She'd barely been widowed 3 weeks. It was too soon to feel anything for anyone. Too soon to let herself hope for something more than just survival and stability. But her heart, it seemed, had its own ideas. And as she prepared for bed that night, as she held James and sang him to sleep, she couldn't stop thinking about storm-gray eyes and gentle hands, and a voice that promised she'd never be alone again. Outside, Silver Creek settled into its evening rhythms. In his cabin on the edge of town, Zachary sat with Caroline, the two of them talking late into the night, slowly rebuilding what had been broken. At the boarding house, Eleanor Henderson smiled to herself, pleased with how her matchmaking was progressing. At the Harmon's office, the doctor and his wife exchanged knowing glances. And in the guest room upstairs, Kathleen Morgan dreamed of new beginnings, of second chances, of a future that was slowly, carefully, beginning to take shape. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to Kathleen's life that she hadn't known since before Thomas died. Each morning, she woke in the small cottage behind the schoolhouse, fed and dressed James, then opened the doors to welcome her students. They came in ones and twos at first, children whose parents were cautiously optimistic about the new teacher, but within a week her classroom was full. There was Tommy Peterson, age 7, who could barely read but had a gift for numbers that astonished her. Sarah and Samuel Yates, twins of 9, who competed fiercely over every lesson. Little Molly Chen, whose parents ran the laundry and who translated Kathleen's instructions into Cantonese for her younger brother. 16 students in all, ranging from 5 to 14, each with their own strengths and struggles. Kathleen discovered that she loved teaching even more than she'd remembered. There was something deeply satisfying about watching a child's face light up when a difficult concept finally made sense, about nurturing young minds and helping them see beyond the rough frontier town to the wider world that existed in books and ideas. James adapted to classroom life with surprising ease. Mrs. Henderson had donated a cradle that Kathleen kept in the corner, and the children took turns rocking him when he fussed. The older girls especially doted on him, and Kathleen often found herself teaching with a baby in her arms because one of her students had brought him over for comfort. Caroline Blackwood became a regular presence at the cottage and the schoolhouse. She'd arrive mid-morning with fresh bread or mending supplies, staying to help with James while Kathleen taught. At first, their interactions were careful, almost formal, 2 women brought together by circumstance and the man who connected them both. But gradually, a genuine friendship began to form. "You're good with the children," Caroline observed one afternoon, watching Kathleen patiently explain long division to the older students. "Patient in a way I never could be." "I had a good teacher," Kathleen replied, wiping chalk from her hands. "My mother always said the key was to remember what it felt like to not understand something. Once you can put yourself in their place, teaching becomes easier." Caroline was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. "I used to help Rachel with Emily's lessons. Emily was so bright, always asking questions. She wanted to know everything about everything." Her voice caught slightly. "She would have loved having you as a teacher." It was the first time Caroline had spoken so openly about her lost niece. Kathleen set down her chalk and moved to sit beside her friend, taking her hand. "Tell me about her. About all of them." And Caroline did. She spoke haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, painting pictures with words of the family she'd lost. Rachel, who'd had Zachary's gray eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. Tom, steady and kind, who'd adored his wife completely. Emily, precocious and curious. Daniel, who'd just started walking before the fire took him. "I avoided talking about them for so long," Caroline said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "It hurt too much. But keeping silent hurt worse, I think. Like I was letting them disappear entirely." "They haven't disappeared," Kathleen assured her. "They live in your memories, in your stories. And now they live in mine too, a little bit. That's how love continues, even after loss." Caroline squeezed her hand. "How did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just a woman who's lost people too." Kathleen glanced at James, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. "But I'm learning that grief doesn't have to be the end of everything. Sometimes it can be a beginning too." Zachary came by the schoolhouse most evenings after his patrol, ostensibly to check on security, but really, they all knew, to see Kathleen and James. He'd sit on the porch steps while Kathleen graded papers, talking about his day or helping with small repairs around the cottage. Sometimes Caroline joined them, and the 3 would watch the sun set over the prairie, finding comfort in shared silence. The town noticed, of course. Silver Creek was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and the growing connection between the widowed schoolteacher and the lonely deputy was a frequent topic of conversation. Mrs. Henderson beamed with proprietorial pride whenever she saw them together. Dr. Harmon made knowing comments about how well Kathleen had settled in. Even the children asked innocent questions about whether Deputy Blackwood was going to be James's new papa. Kathleen deflected these questions with practiced ease, but privately, she couldn't deny the truth of what was growing between them. She looked forward to Zachary's evening visits with an eagerness that had nothing to do with friendship and everything to do with the flutter in her chest when she saw him. She found herself paying more attention to her appearance on days she knew he'd be patrolling near the school. She dreamed of him more nights than she cared to admit. But it was too soon. Thomas had only been dead 6 weeks. What kind of woman developed feelings for another man so quickly? What kind of wife would she have been to Thomas if she could move on so easily? The guilt ate at her, even as her heart pulled her inexorably toward Zachary. 3 weeks after Kathleen started teaching, Silver Creek prepared for its monthly community picnic, an event held by Willow Creek, a small waterway that ran south of town. The whole town would be there, folks bringing food and blankets to spend a Sunday afternoon in fellowship and celebration. "You have to come," Eleanor Henderson insisted when she stopped by the cottage Saturday afternoon. "It's tradition. Besides, the children would be disappointed if their teacher didn't attend." "I don't know," Kathleen hedged. "James is still so young, and I wouldn't want to impose—" "Nonsense. Half the town will be there with babies younger than James, and Caroline's been talking about nothing else for days. She's quite excited about going." That caught Kathleen's attention. "Caroline is? She's been so withdrawn since she arrived. I didn't think she'd want to be around so many people." Eleanor's expression softened. "I think she's finally starting to heal. Having you and James in her life, being able to help with the baby, it's given her purpose again. And I've seen her and Zachary together. Really together, not just existing in the same space. Whatever you're doing, dear, keep doing it. You're good for this family." The next day dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for a picnic. Kathleen dressed James in a sweet little outfit that Mrs. Harmon had made, blue cotton with tiny buttons, and put on her best dress, a soft yellow calico that brought out the auburn highlights in her dark hair. She told herself she wasn't dressing up for anyone in particular, but a racing pulse when Zachary arrived to escort her to the creek suggested otherwise. He looked different out of his usual work clothes, still wearing trousers and boots, but his shirt was clean and pressed, and he'd shaved carefully. His hair was neatly combed, and when he saw Kathleen, his face lit up in a way that made her stomach flip. "You look beautiful," he said, then immediately flushed as if he hadn't meant to say it aloud. "Thank you," Kathleen replied, her own cheeks warming. "You look very handsome yourself." Caroline appeared from behind him, carrying a large basket. "Stop making eyes at each other and let's go," she teased. "The food won't stay warm forever, and I'm starving." The walk to Willow Creek took 20 minutes, following a well-worn path through prairie grass dotted with late summer wildflowers. James rode contentedly in Kathleen's arms, while Zachary carried her blanket and Caroline managed the food basket. Other families walked the same path, the Petersons with their brood of 5, the Yates twins racing ahead of their parents, old Charlie Goodwin riding his mule and singing off-key hymns. The creek itself was a beautiful spot, shaded by cottonwood trees and willows, the water running clear and cool over smooth stones. Someone had strung up colorful bunting between the trees, and several long tables had been set up for the potluck. Children were already splashing in the shallow water, their laughter ringing across the meadow. Zachary spread Kathleen's blanket under a large cottonwood while Caroline arranged their food on the communal tables: fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and a peach pie that smelled heavenly. Kathleen settled on the blanket with James, watching as her students played and shouted, their formal classroom demeanor abandoned in favor of pure childhood joy. "Mrs. Morgan! Mrs. Morgan!" Tommy Peterson came running up, dripping wet. "Come see the tadpoles we found. There's hundreds of them." "Let your teacher rest a moment, Tommy," Zachary said, but his tone was kind. "She just got here." "It's all right," Kathleen laughed. "I'd love to see the tadpoles. Zachary, would you mind watching James for a moment?" She handed the baby to him before he could protest, and followed Tommy to the creek's edge where several children were crouched over the water, peering at the dark shapes darting through the shallows. Kathleen knelt beside them, her dress getting damp, and together they observed the tadpoles with scientific interest. "These will turn into frogs," she explained. "Can anyone tell me what we call that process?" "Metamorphosis!" Sarah Yates shouted triumphantly. "You taught us that last week." "Excellent memory, Sarah. And what kind of frogs do you think these will become?" The children debated this question with enthusiasm while Kathleen guided their observations, turning the moment into an impromptu nature lesson. When she finally returned to the blanket, she found Zachary holding James with surprising competence, the baby's tiny hand wrapped around his finger. "He likes you," Kathleen observed, settling beside them. "I think he just likes having something to hold on to," Zachary replied, but there was something tender in his expression as he looked down at James. "He's a good baby, hardly fusses at all." "He's been better since we got to Silver Creek. I think the security helps. Babies can sense when their mothers are stressed." Are you? Stressed, I mean. Kathleen considered the question honestly. Less than I was. The teaching helps. Having a home helps. Having friends helps. She met his eyes. You've helped. More than you know. Zachary's expression intensified, and for a moment Kathleen thought he might say something important, might give voice to the thing that hung unspoken between them. But Caroline chose that moment to return with plates of food, and the opportunity passed. They ate together, the three of them, joined occasionally by other townspeople who stopped to greet Kathleen and admire James. The Harmons came by, as did Mayor Thornton and Reverend Walsh, both praising Kathleen's work at the school. Mrs. Henderson lingered longer than most, making pointed comments about what a lovely family they made and how natural Zachary looked holding a baby. Eleanor, you're being obvious, Caroline finally said, laughing. Leave them alone. I'm just making observations, Mrs. Henderson sniffed. Is it a crime to notice when two people are well suited to each other? After she left, Kathleen and Zachary sat in mortified silence until Caroline burst out laughing. Oh, don't look so scandalized, both of you. The whole town is talking about it anyway. You might as well acknowledge what's obvious to everyone else. And what's obvious? Zachary asked carefully. That you're falling in love with each other, you stubborn fools. Caroline stood, brushing grass from her skirt. Now, I'm going to take James and visit with some of the other ladies. You two need to talk, really talk, without an audience or excuses. Don't waste this. Before either of them could protest, she'd scooped up James and walked away, leaving Kathleen and Zachary alone on the blanket. Around them, the picnic continued, people eating and laughing, children playing, musicians tuning their instruments for the dancing that would start later. But in their small space under the cottonwood, the world narrowed to just the two of them. She's not subtle, my sister, Zachary said finally. No, Kathleen agreed, but she's not wrong either, is she? The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Zachary turned to face her fully, and the expression in his eyes made Kathleen's breath catch. No, he said quietly. She's not wrong. Kathleen, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Can you do that? Kathleen nodded, her heart hammering. Zachary took a deep breath. When I found you on that prairie, I thought I was just doing my job, helping someone in need the way I've helped dozens of people over the years. But from the first moment I saw you holding that gun, ready to die protecting your son, something shifted in me. Something I thought was dead woke up again. He paused, his jaw working as he searched for words. These past weeks, watching you build a life here, watching you with James and with the children at school, watching you help Caroline heal, I've fallen in love with you, Kathleen. Completely, irrevocably in love. And I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving your husband. I know I have no right to feel this way, let alone say it. But Caroline's right. We shouldn't waste this. Life's too short and too uncertain to leave important things unsaid. Kathleen's eyes filled with tears. Zachary. Wait, let me finish. He reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm not asking you to make any decisions or promises. I just need you to know that I'm here, that I want to be here. When I hold James, I don't just feel affection for a baby I helped save. I feel like I'm holding my son. When I fix things around your cottage, I'm not just being neighborly. I'm trying to take care of you both in every way I can. And when I see you every evening, the whole rest of my day makes sense because it led to that moment. He stopped, breathing hard, his eyes searching hers. I want to be James's father, Kathleen. I want to be your husband. Not right now. I understand it's too soon, but someday, if you'll have me. If you could ever feel even a fraction of what I feel for you. The tears were flowing freely down Kathleen's cheeks now. Her hand trembled in his. You foolish, wonderful man, she whispered. Don't you know? Haven't you realized? Realized what? That I'm already in love with you too. The words came out in a rush, liberating and terrifying at once. I've been fighting it, feeling guilty about it, telling myself it's too soon and too wrong. But my heart doesn't care about timelines or propriety. My heart chose you weeks ago. Zachary's face transformed, hope and joy and wonder, all mixing together. Kathleen, I loved Thomas, she continued, needing him to understand. I loved him deeply, and I'll always carry that love with me. But he's gone, and I'm still here. James is still here, and we need more than just survival. We need life. We need love. We need you. Are you sure? Zachary's voice was rough with emotion. I need you to be absolutely certain, because once you say yes to this, I'm never letting go. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you and James. I'll protect you, provide for you, love you with everything I have. But I need to know you're sure. Kathleen lifted her free hand to his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, seeing herself reflected in those storm-gray eyes. I'm sure. I'm terrified, and it's too fast and people will talk, but I'm sure. You saved my life, Zachary. Now let me save yours. Let us save each other. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Kathleen didn't pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Not a passionate kiss, there would be time for that later, but a kiss that sealed a covenant, that marked a beginning. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling through tears. Around them, the world came back into focus. The sound of children laughing, music starting up, the murmur of conversation. But everything looked different now, brighter somehow, full of possibility. We should probably talk about timing, Zachary said, still holding her hand. Figure out when would be appropriate. Christmas, Kathleen interrupted. I want to marry you at Christmas. That gives us 3 months. Long enough to be somewhat respectable, but not so long that we're being foolish. Christmas, Zachary repeated, testing the word. Then he grinned, that transformative smile she loved. Christmas it is. Will you marry me, Kathleen Morgan? Will you let me be James's father and your husband? Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. They sat together under the cottonwood, hands clasped, watching the picnic unfold. Caroline returned eventually with James, took one look at their faces, and burst into delighted tears. She hugged them both fiercely, declaring herself the best matchmaker in Colorado and demanding credit for bringing them together. You sent that telegram, Kathleen accused, suddenly understanding. You're the one who brought Caroline here. Guilty, Caroline admitted cheerfully. Someone had to shake you both out of your noble suffering, and look how well it worked out. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of joy. Word spread quickly about the engagement. Mrs. Henderson made sure of that, and people came by to offer congratulations. The children from Kathleen's class were ecstatic, declaring that they'd known all along that Deputy Blackwood would marry their teacher. Mayor Thornton shook Zachary's hand and welcomed him to the ranks of married men. Reverend Walsh offered to perform the ceremony and suggested they start meeting with him weekly for premarital counseling. As evening approached and people began packing up to return to town, Kathleen found herself standing by the creek with James in her arms, watching the water flow over stones worn smooth by time. Zachary came up behind her, his arms encircling both her and the baby, and she leaned back against his solid warmth. Are you happy? He asked softly. So happy it scares me, Kathleen admitted. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to be taken away. Nothing's going to take this away. I won't let it. His arms tightened protectively. We've both lost enough. We've both suffered enough. It's time for good things now. Time for building instead of mourning. Time for family, Kathleen added, turning her head to look up at him. Our family, the 3 of us. The 3 of us, Zachary agreed. Then he hesitated. Kathleen, there's something I need to tell you about what happened after I found you. She turned in his arms, concern flickering across her face at his serious tone. What is it? When I brought you to town that night, when I sat with Doc Harmon while he examined you and James, I made a decision. I told myself that if you both survived, if you made it through, I'd take it as a sign that I was supposed to be part of your lives, that I was supposed to protect you both. He paused, his eyes vulnerable. I've been protecting you ever since, but until today, I didn't know if you'd want more than that. I didn't know if you'd ever see me as more than just the deputy who saved you. Oh, Zachary. Kathleen's heart ached for him. I've never seen you as just a deputy. From that first moment, even through my fear and exhaustion, I saw your kindness. I saw your heart. And every day since, I've seen more reasons to love you. They stood together as twilight gathered, James dozing peacefully between them, and made quiet plans for their future. They'd marry at Christmas in the little white church. Kathleen would continue teaching. They both agreed that her work was too important to abandon. Zachary would keep his position as deputy, but they'd live in a house he'd build on land he'd already picked out, just beyond the edge of town where James could have room to grow. As they walked back to town with Caroline, joining the stream of other families, Kathleen felt a peace settle over her that she hadn't known since before Thomas died. Different than what she'd had with Thomas. This was deeper somehow, forged in survival and loss and understanding. She and Zachary had both been broken by tragedy. Now they were healing each other, building something new from the fragments of their shattered lives. The following weeks brought a flurry of preparation. Word of the engagement spread beyond Silver Creek to neighboring settlements, and letters of congratulation arrived regularly. Kathleen threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, and her students responded with enthusiasm. The schoolhouse became a center of community life, with parents stopping by not just to collect their children, but to discuss lessons and progress. Caroline found her own healing in helping prepare for the wedding. She and Kathleen spent evenings sewing, a simple but elegant cream-colored dress for Kathleen, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Caroline proved to have remarkable skill with needle and thread, and as she worked, she talked more freely about Rachel and the life before the fire. "Rachel would have loved you," she said one evening, carefully stitching pearls onto Kathleen's bodice. She always said Zachary needed someone strong enough to match him, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by his size or his silences. "I'm not that strong," Kathleen protested. "I was ready to give up on the prairie if Zachary hadn't found me." "But you didn't give up. You kept walking even when you couldn't walk anymore. You held that gun even though you'd never fired one. You survived." Caroline looked up from her work. "That's the strongest kind of strength there is. And James will grow up knowing that about his mother, knowing that she fought for him with everything she had." "Both his parents fought for him," Kathleen corrected gently. "Zachary might not be his biological father, but he's already his father in every way that matters." Caroline's eyes grew misty. "You're giving my brother something he thought he'd lost forever, the chance to be part of a family again, to have children to love and protect. You have no idea what a gift that is." But Kathleen thought she did, because Zachary was giving her the same gift, a future, a partner, a love that felt both safe and exciting. Someone who understood loss and chose hope anyway. 2 weeks before the wedding, trouble came to Silver Creek. Zachary had been tracking a gang of rustlers who'd been hitting ranches north of town, stealing cattle and horses. The ranchers were getting desperate, and tensions were running high. When word came that the rustlers had been spotted heading toward the Morrison Ranch, the largest spread in the area, Zachary and 2 other deputies rode out to intercept them. Kathleen was in the middle of teaching geography when Caroline burst through the schoolhouse door, her face white. "There's been shooting at the Morrison place. The deputies engaged the rustlers. Zachary's been hit." The world tilted. Kathleen grabbed the desk to steady herself, her vision tunneling. No. Not now. Not when they'd finally found each other. Not when they'd finally begun to heal. "How bad?" she managed to ask. "I don't know. They're bringing him to Doc Harmon's now. I came to get you." Kathleen turned to her students, who were staring with wide, frightened eyes. "Class is dismissed. Go straight home and tell your parents what's happened. Sarah, Samuel, can you please take James to Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house? Tell her what happened and that I'll collect him when I can." The children scattered quickly. Kathleen grabbed her shawl and ran through town with Caroline, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Please," she prayed wordlessly, "please let him be all right. Please don't take him from me now." They arrived at Dr. Harmon's office to find a crowd already gathering outside, worried townspeople who'd heard about the shooting. Mrs. Harmon met them at the door, her expression grave but not hopeless. "He's alive, but it's serious. Gunshot to the left shoulder, high enough that it missed his lung, but there's concern about the bone and blood loss. William's working on him now." "Can I see him?" Kathleen asked desperately. "Not yet. But as soon as William says it's safe, you'll be the first to know. I promise." The waiting was torture. Kathleen paced the small front room while Caroline sat with her face in her hands, both of them silent with fear. Other people came and went. The other deputies reporting on the rustlers, all captured or killed. Mayor Thornton offering support. Reverend Walsh leading a prayer circle outside. After what felt like hours but was probably only 90 minutes, Dr. Harmon emerged from the back room. His shirt was blood-stained and his face lined with exhaustion, but he was smiling faintly. "He's stable. The bullet's out. I've cleaned and stitched the wound, and barring infection, he should make a full recovery. He's asking for you, Kathleen." She nearly collapsed with relief. Caroline caught her, and together they followed Dr. Harmon back to the examination room where Zachary lay on a narrow bed, his left shoulder bandaged and his face pale but alert. "Hey," he said weakly when he saw Kathleen. "Sorry for the scare." She wanted to scold him for being reckless, wanted to cry with relief, wanted to kiss him senseless. Instead, she pulled up a chair and took his good hand, holding it between both of hers. "Don't you dare do that to me again. Do you understand? Don't you dare!" "Yes, ma'am," he said, a ghost of his usual smile appearing. "Though to be fair, I didn't exactly plan on getting shot." "What happened?" Carolyn asked from the doorway. "Rustlers had more men than we expected. We went in thinking it was just the 5 we'd been tracking, but they had reinforcements. Got caught in crossfire." He winced as he tried to shift position. "I'm getting too old for this kind of excitement." "You're 32, Kathleen said, torn between exasperation and overwhelming relief. "That's hardly old. Feels old when you've been shot." Dr. Harmon reappeared with a dose of laudanum. "That's enough talking for now. You need rest and quiet. Kathleen, you can sit with him for a bit, but then he needs to sleep. No arguments." After Caroline left and Dr. Harmon returned to the front room, Kathleen sat beside Zachary's bed, still holding his hand. The afternoon light slanted through the window, painting golden bars across the floor. Outside, she could hear the town returning to its normal rhythms, the crisis passing. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. "For a few moments, before Mrs. Harmon told me you were alive, I thought I'd lost you, and I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The world just stopped." "I'm sorry," Zachary said, his voice already growing drowsy from the laudanum. "So sorry for scaring you. But Kathleen, that feeling you had, that terror of losing me, that's how I feel every single day about you and James. That's why I need to marry you, need to make sure you're protected and provided for. Because the thought of anything happening to either of you destroys me." Tears slipped down Kathleen's cheeks. "Then we'll protect each other. We'll be careful and smart, and we'll live a long, happy life together. All of us, you, me, James, and whatever other children we're blessed with." "Other children?" Zachary's eyes had drifted closed, but he was smiling. "You want more?" "Of course I do. James needs siblings, and you'll be an amazing father to however many children we have." "Good," he murmured, sleep claiming him. "Want a big family. Want noise and chaos and love. Want everything we both lost, to find it again. Together." His words trailed off into sleep. Kathleen sat with him as shadows lengthened, as Dr. Harmon checked on him twice more, as evening fell outside. When Caroline returned with James, Kathleen nursed the baby while keeping vigil by Zachary's bedside, finding strange peace in this moment. Her future husband recovering, her son content, her friend quietly supportive nearby. Zachary spent 3 days at Dr. Harmon's office before being cleared to return to his cabin, with strict instructions to rest and let the wound heal. Caroline moved back to the cabin to help care for him, and Kathleen visited every afternoon after school with James, bringing meals and news and companionship. "You're spoiling me," Zachary complained one afternoon, though he was clearly enjoying the attention. "Good, you deserve to be spoiled." Kathleen settled beside him on the porch, James sleeping in her arms. "Besides, I'm practicing for when we're married. You might as well get used to being fussed over. I can think of worse fates." He reached over with his good arm and pulled her close. 2 more weeks until Christmas. 2 more weeks until you're my wife. 2 more weeks until you're stuck with me forever," Kathleen corrected, smiling. "Best thing that ever happened to me, getting stuck with you." The shooting changed something in the town's perception of their relationship. Before, there had been some whispers about the propriety of such a quick engagement, but after seeing Kathleen's fear when Zachary was hurt, after watching how they cared for each other during his recovery, Even the most skeptical citizens had to admit that this was real love, the kind of love that couldn't be rushed or delayed or planned, the kind that simply happened when two broken people found each other at exactly the right moment. Christmas approached with its usual excitement, but this year the whole town seemed invested in the wedding. The church ladies organized decorations. The men built Zachary and Kathleen a new bed as a wedding gift. Children from the school practiced singing carols for the ceremony. Mrs. Henderson baked a 3-tier cake that was the talk of Silver Creek. The night before the wedding, Kathleen lay in her cottage bedroom holding James, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been on that prairie ready to die. Now she was hours away from starting a new life with a man she loved, in a town that had become home, with a future full of promise. "Your papa and I are getting married tomorrow," she whispered to James, who gazed up at her with those serious dark eyes. "Your new papa, I mean. The one who loves us both so much. Are you ready to be part of our family?" James gurgled, which she chose to interpret as enthusiasm. There was a soft knock at her door. "Kathleen, are you awake?" Caroline's voice. "Come in." Caroline entered carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I wanted to give you this tonight, a wedding present of sorts." She sat on the edge of the bed and unwrapped the object carefully, revealing a small framed photograph, the only one that had survived the warehouse fire. "This is Rachel, Tom, Emily, and Daniel," Caroline said quietly. "It was taken just a few months before they died. I want you to have it, to put in your new house, because they would have been your family too, and I want their memory to be part of your life with Zachary." Kathleen looked at the photograph through tears. Rachel did have Zachary's eyes, just as Caroline had said. Emily was grinning at the camera with mischievous joy. Baby Daniel looked bewildered by the whole process, and Tom stood behind his family with pride and love written all over his face. "Thank you," Kathleen whispered. "I'll treasure this. I'll make sure James knows about his aunt and uncle and cousins. I'll make sure they're never forgotten." That's all I could ask. Caroline hugged her tightly. "Tomorrow you marry my brother, and that makes you my sister. Really and truly. I never thought I'd have family again, but now I do. You and Zachary and James. You're giving me reasons to keep living, keep hoping. Thank you for that." They sat together in the quiet cottage, two women who'd been strangers months ago and were now bound together by love and loss and the complicated beauty of chosen family. Outside, snow began to fall, the first real snow of winter, covering Silver Creek in white silence, making everything clean and new and full of possibility. Morning came bright and cold, Christmas Day dawning clear and sparkling. Kathleen dressed carefully in her cream-colored gown while Caroline helped with her hair, weaving small white flowers through the dark strands. James wore a tiny suit that Mrs. Harmon had sewn, and he looked so serious and handsome that both women laughed through their tears. The church was packed when they arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the wedding, filling the pews and spilling into the aisles. Someone had decorated with pine boughs and candles, making the simple building look magical in the winter light. And at the front of the church, standing beside Reverend Walsh, was Zachary. He wore his best suit, his wounded arm still in a sling, but his face radiant with joy. When he saw Kathleen walking down the aisle with James in her arms and Caroline beside her, his expression transformed into something so full of love and wonder that everyone watching felt their own hearts squeeze in response. Kathleen reached the altar and handed James to Caroline, then took both of Zachary's hands in hers. Reverend Walsh spoke about love and sacrifice, about second chances and God's grace, about building families from ashes and creating hope from despair, but Kathleen barely heard the words. She was too focused on Zachary's face, on the promise in his eyes, on the future unfolding before them. "Do you, Zachary James Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Zachary said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Kathleen Marie Morgan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Kathleen whispered. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Zachary, you may kiss your bride." He did, gently and thoroughly, and the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. When they finally pulled apart, both grinning, Zachary reached for James. Caroline handed over the baby, and suddenly they were a complete picture. Husband, wife, and son, standing together at the altar as snow fell softly outside the windows. "My family," Zachary said softly, for Kathleen's ears alone. "Finally, my family." "Our family," Kathleen corrected, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. "Forever." The reception following the ceremony transformed Mrs. Henderson's boarding house into a place of warmth and celebration that seemed to push back against the December cold. Long tables groaned under the weight of food the entire town had contributed: roasted turkey and ham, fresh bread still steaming, vegetables preserved from autumn harvests, and that magnificent three-tier cake crowned with sugar flowers that Mrs. Henderson had labored over for days. Kathleen sat beside Zachary at the head table, his good arm around her shoulders, James content in her lap, and felt overwhelmed by the sheer goodness of this moment. Her students had performed their carols beautifully, their young voices filling the church with joy. Now they raced around the boarding house with the uninhibited energy of children freed from their Sunday best behavior, while their parents laughed and ate and toasted the newlyweds. "Happy?" Zachary asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "So happy I keep waiting to wake up," Kathleen admitted. 6 months ago I was dying on the prairie. Now I'm married to the most wonderful man in Colorado, surrounded by friends, with my son safe in my arms. It doesn't seem real." "It's real," Zachary assured her. "Every bit of it, and it's only going to get better." Caroline appeared with plates of food for them both, shooing away well-wishers so the newlyweds could eat. "You need to keep your strength up," she insisted, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. "You've got a long life ahead of you together, starting tonight." Kathleen blushed, but Zachary just laughed. His laughter came more easily these days, she'd noticed. The darkness that had haunted his eyes when they first met had lifted, replaced by something lighter, more hopeful. Healing, she realized. They were all healing together. Dr. Harmon stopped by their table. His weathered face creased in a smile. "I've seen a lot of weddings in my years here, but I don't think I've ever seen a happier couple. You're good for each other, you know that?" "We do," Zachary said, squeezing Kathleen's shoulder. "Believe me, Doc, we know." "Your shoulder healing properly?" the doctor asked, his professional instincts never far from the surface. "Some stiffness, but the pain's mostly gone. Should be able to ditch this sling in another week or so. Make sure you do the exercises I showed you, and no heavy lifting until I clear you." Dr. Harmon's gaze shifted to Kathleen. "That means you're in charge of making sure he doesn't overdo it. Think you can handle that?" "I'll do my best," Kathleen promised, though she knew from experience that Zachary was stubborn about taking care of himself. Though he's not the easiest patient. "None of the Blackwoods are," Dr. Harmon agreed, with a meaningful look at Caroline, who pretended not to hear. "But that's what makes them interesting." As evening deepened outside and lamps were lit throughout the boarding house, the furniture was pushed back and someone produced a fiddle. Music filled the air, reels and waltzes and square dances that had everyone from the oldest residents to the youngest children participating. Zachary couldn't dance properly with his injured shoulder, but he stood with Kathleen swaying gently to the slower songs. James dozed off between them, creating a small island of intimacy in the midst of the celebration. "I wish Thomas could see this," Kathleen said quietly during one such moment. "I wish he could know that James will be loved and protected, that we found safety after all." Zachary didn't tense at the mention of her late husband, didn't pull away or show any sign of jealousy. Instead, he simply held her closer. "I think he'd be glad you're not alone, that you found someone to help carry the weight." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. If I'd been the one who died and Rachel had survived the fire, I'd want her to find happiness again. Wouldn't want her spending her life in mourning." His voice grew rough with emotion. "Love doesn't end when someone dies, Kathleen. It just changes shape. You can love Thomas's memory and love me at the same time. There's room in the heart for both." She looked up at him, this man who understood loss so deeply, who offered her permission to grieve and hope simultaneously. "How did you get so wise?" "Hard experience," he said with a slight smile, "and a lot of long nights thinking about what really matters in life." Later, much later, when the party had wound down and most of the guests had departed, Zachary and Kathleen prepared to leave for their new home. It wasn't the grand house Zachary had spoken of building. That would come in spring when the weather permitted construction. For now, they'd made do with his cabin, expanded slightly and furnished with donations from the generous townsfolk of Silver Creek. Caroline had spent the previous week transforming the place, adding curtains and rugs and small touches that made it feel like a home rather than just a bachelor's dwelling. She'd insisted on staying at the boarding house for the first few weeks of their marriage to give them privacy, though both Kathleen and Zachary had protested that she was welcome to remain. "You need time to be a family," Caroline had insisted. "Just the three of you. I'll visit often, and I'll be back to help with James whenever you need me. But these first weeks, they're important. They're when you figure out how to be together." Now, as they bundled James into warm blankets and prepared for the short ride to the cabin, Mrs. Henderson pressed packages into Kathleen's hands. "Food for tomorrow, so you don't have to cook. And some other things you might need." She winked, leaving no doubt what those other things might be, and Kathleen's face flamed. The ride through town was quiet, Silver Creek tucked in for the night under its blanket of snow. A few windows still glowed with lamplight, and smoke rose from chimneys into the cold, clear sky. Stars blazed overhead, so many and so bright that they seemed close enough to touch. Zachary's cabin sat at the edge of town, backed by a stand of pine trees that provided shelter from the prairie winds. As they approached, Kathleen saw that someone had lit lamps inside, making the windows glow welcomingly. Caroline's work again, probably. Or maybe Mrs. Henderson's. Zachary helped her down from the horse, then reached for James, who was sleeping peacefully despite the cold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, and the name sent a thrill through her. "Mrs. Blackwood," she repeated, testing how it sounded. "I like that." "Good, because you're stuck with it now." He managed to unlock the door one-handed and pushed it open, revealing the transformed interior. Caroline had outdone herself. The main room was warm and inviting, with a fire already laid in the hearth waiting to be lit. New curtains hung at the windows, and a comfortable sofa sat before the fireplace. The table was set with simple dishes, and fresh flowers, somehow acquired in December, graced the center. Through an open doorway, Kathleen could see their bedroom, the new bed draped with a quilt she recognized as a group project from the church ladies. "It's perfect," she whispered. Zachary set James in a cradle near the hearth, another gift, this one from Dr. and Mrs. Harmon, and then turned to Kathleen with an expression that made her heart race. "I need to do this properly," he said, and before she could ask what he meant, he'd lifted her in his arms. "Zachary, your shoulder." "Is fine," he assured her, carrying her over the threshold despite her protests. "I've been waiting months to do this. I'm not letting a little gunshot wound stop me." He set her down gently in the center of their new home, then cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Kathleen Blackwood. I'm going to spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you happy." "You already make me happy," she said, tears pricking her eyes yet again. She seemed to cry at everything these days. Happiness, gratitude, love, all of it spilling over in tears. "You make me happier than I ever thought I could be again." He kissed her then, not the chaste kiss from the ceremony, but something deeper, more passionate, full of promise and desire and commitment. Kathleen melted into it, her arms going around his neck, and for a long moment there was nothing but the two of them and the overwhelming rightness of being together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "We should check on James, get him settled properly, and you're probably exhausted from the day." "I am," Kathleen admitted, "but I'm also your wife now, and I'd like to start our marriage properly, if you know what I mean." Zachary's eyes darkened with desire. "Are you sure? We can wait if you're not ready. There's no rush." "I'm sure. I want this. I want you." She took his hand and led him toward their bedroom. "James is asleep and will be for hours. We have time." Later, much later, they lay tangled together in the marriage bed, the quilt pulled up against the winter cold, their bodies warm with love and contentment. James had woken once, and Kathleen had nursed him while Zachary watched with an expression of such tenderness it had made her cry again. Now the baby slept peacefully in his cradle, and the newly married couple held each other in the darkness. Tell me something I don't know about you, Kathleen said softly, her head on Zachary's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Like what? Anything. I want to know everything. We have the rest of our lives, but I want to start learning now. Zachary was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. All right. When I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a teacher. My father laughed at me, said it wasn't proper work for a man. But I loved books, loved learning. Still do, actually, though I don't get much time to read these days. I didn't know that, Kathleen said, delighted by this glimpse into his past. What changed? What made you become a lawman instead? My father died when I was 14, killed by a drunk who shot him over a card game. After that, I couldn't stand the thought of injustice going unpunished. Became a deputy as soon as I was old enough, and I've been wearing a badge ever since. His voice grew heavy. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd followed that first dream instead. You still could, Kathleen said, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him. Not give up being a deputy necessarily, but maybe teach too. There are always boys who need guidance, who need someone to show them that strength and learning aren't mutually exclusive. Zachary smiled, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. Maybe someday. For now, I'm content with being a husband and father. Learning how to do those jobs well will take all my concentration. You're already wonderful at both, Kathleen assured him. The way you are with James, the way you look at him, he's going to grow up knowing he's loved. That's the most important thing a father can give. I want more children with you, Zachary said suddenly, his hand moving to rest on her flat stomach. I want to fill this house with noise and chaos and love. I want James to have brothers and sisters. I want to build the family I always dreamed of but never thought I'd have. We will, Kathleen promised. God willing, we'll have more children. As many as he sees fit to bless us with. I'd like at least one daughter, Zachary continued, warming to the subject. A little girl with your eyes and your kindness. We could name her after my mother, Elizabeth. Sarah Elizabeth, maybe. What do you think? I think Sarah Elizabeth is a beautiful name, Kathleen said, moved by his enthusiasm. And I hope we're blessed with her someday soon. They talked long into the night, making plans and sharing dreams, building the foundation of their life together with words and promises and love. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Silver Creek in silence. Inside the warm cabin, a family slept. A deputy and a teacher and an infant son who would grow up knowing nothing but safety and love. The weeks following the wedding established new patterns and rhythms for the Blackwood household. Kathleen returned to teaching after a brief honeymoon of 3 days, bringing James with her to the schoolhouse as she'd always done. But now she returned each evening to a home where Zachary waited, where dinner was shared and days were discussed, and small domestic pleasures were savored. Zachary's shoulder healed slowly but steadily, and by mid-January, Dr. Harmon pronounced him fit for duty again. The first time he went on patrol after his recovery, Kathleen found herself anxious in a way she hadn't expected. She watched the clock, counted the hours, and didn't relax until she saw him ride back into town at sunset, safe and whole. You worried about me, he observed that evening, pulling her into his arms. Of course I worried. You were shot less than 2 months ago, and now you're back out there where it could happen again. It's my job, Kathleen. It's what I do. I know, and I'm not asking you to stop, I'm just asking you to be careful, to remember that you have people who need you to come home safely. He kissed her forehead. I'll remember. Every single day I'll remember. Caroline became a regular fixture in their lives, visiting several times a week to help with James and simply to be near family. She and Kathleen grew closer, their friendship deepening into something that felt sisterly and genuine. They spent evenings sewing while Zachary read aloud from whatever book he'd borrowed from the small-town library. Charles Dickens was a current favorite, and they were working their way through David Copperfield with great enjoyment. You read beautifully, Caroline told her brother one evening. You should have been a teacher. You would have been wonderful at it. Maybe in another life, Zachary said, but he looked pleased by the compliment. In February, 2 significant events occurred almost simultaneously. The first was that Caroline received a letter from an orphanage in Denver, asking if she'd be interested in a teaching position working with children who'd lost their parents. The director had heard about her from Reverend Walsh, who'd taken it upon himself to write on her behalf. They want someone who understands loss, Caroline explained, reading the letter aloud at dinner one evening. Someone who can connect with children dealing with grief and trauma. The Reverend apparently told them about Rachel's family, about how I've been helping with James and finding purpose again. "What do you want to do?" Kathleen asked gently. Caroline was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter. A year ago, even 6 months ago, I would have said no immediately. The thought of being around children who'd lost everything would have been too painful. But now, she looked up, her eyes bright with possibility. Now I think maybe that's exactly what I'm meant to do. To take what I've learned from my own pain and use it to help others. "It's dangerous," Zachary said, his protective instincts evident. "Denver's a rough town, and you'd be alone there." "I wouldn't be alone. The orphanage provides housing, and I'd be surrounded by staff and children. And Zach, I need this. I need to know that Rachel and Tom and the children, that their deaths meant something, that some good came from all that loss." "Then you should go," Kathleen said firmly, ignoring Zachary's sharp look. "Not because you have to leave, but because you want to, because it's the right next step for you." "But what about James? What about helping you?" "We'll miss you terribly," Kathleen admitted, "but we'll be fine, and you can visit and we'll write letters. This isn't goodbye forever, Caroline. It's just the next chapter." The second significant event came 3 weeks later, when Kathleen realized that her monthly courses were late. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, but when a second month passed without any sign, she confided in Mrs. Harmon during a visit to the doctor's office. "How late are you, dear?" "Mrs." Harmon asked, her eyes twinkling. "Nearly 8 weeks now, and I've been feeling queasy in the mornings, and tired, so tired all the time." "Well then, I think we can safely say congratulations are in order. You're expecting again, Kathleen. Have you told Zachary?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure first. We've been married less than 3 months. I didn't think it would happen so quickly." "These things happen in their own time," Mrs. Harmon said wisely. "But you should tell him soon. That man will be over the moon." Kathleen chose a quiet evening when Caroline was visiting friends, and it was just the two of them with James. She waited until after dinner, after James had been put down for the night, when they were sitting together on the sofa before the fire. "Zachary, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the report he'd been writing, immediately alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to have another baby. I'm expecting Zachary, our child." For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if the words hadn't quite registered. Then understanding dawned, and his face transformed with joy so pure it took her breath away. "A baby? We're having a baby?" "Yes." Mrs. Harmon confirmed it today. "I'm about 2 months along, which means the baby should arrive in late September or early October." Zachary pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his body shaking with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered fiercely. "Thank you for giving me this. For giving us this." "We're giving it to each other," Kathleen corrected, tears streaming down her own face. "This is our child, Zachary, yours and mine together." He pulled back enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Sarah Elizabeth," he said, "I'm sure of it. This is our daughter, the one we talked about on our wedding night." "It might be another son," Kathleen cautioned, laughing through her tears. "No, I'm certain. It's Sarah. I can feel it." And somehow Kathleen believed him. Perhaps it was wishful thinking, or perhaps it was the certainty in his voice, but she found herself convinced that the child growing inside her was indeed the daughter they'd dreamed of. The news spread through Silver Creek with the usual speed of small-town gossip, and everywhere Kathleen went, people offered congratulations and advice. Some of the older women warned her about working too hard while expecting, but Kathleen continued teaching, knowing that her students needed her and that the work gave her purpose and fulfillment. Caroline delayed her departure for Denver when she heard the news, insisting on staying through the summer to help with James and prepare for the new baby. "I want to meet my niece," she said firmly, when Zachary tried to tell her she didn't need to postpone her new position. "I want to hold her and love her before I go to Denver. The orphanage will understand." Spring came slowly to Colorado that year, winter reluctant to release its grip. But eventually the snow melted, the prairie grass began to green, and wildflowers dotted the landscape with color. Zachary began construction on the larger house he'd promised, working on it during his off-duty hours with help from other men in town. It rose slowly on the plot of land he'd chosen, a gentle rise with a view of the plains in one direction and the town in the other. "This is where our children will grow up," he told Kathleen one Sunday afternoon as they walked the construction site, James toddling between them holding both their hands. "This is where we'll build our life." The house was taking shape beautifully, larger than the cabin, with separate bedrooms for the children, a proper kitchen, and a front porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. Kathleen could picture it all so clearly. James and Sarah playing in the yard, perhaps more children to come, herself and Zachary growing old together in this place they were building with their own hands and hopes. In May, Caroline finally left for Denver. The departure was tearful, with promises to write weekly and visit as often as possible. She held James for a long time, whispering things to him that no one else could hear, then embraced Kathleen carefully, mindful of the pregnancy that was now visibly evident. "Take care of my brother," she told Kathleen, "and take care of yourself and those babies. I'll be back before Sarah arrives, I promise." "You'd better be," Kathleen replied, hugging her fiercely. "She's going to need her Aunt Caroline." Watching Caroline ride away in the stagecoach, Kathleen felt Zachary's arm come around her shoulders. "She'll be all right," he said quietly. "She's stronger than she knows. We all are." "I'm going to miss her." "Me too, but she'll be back. Denver's not so far away that we can't visit." Summer brought heat and the completion of the new house. They moved in during July, transferring their belongings from the cabin in several trips. The space felt enormous after the cabin's cozy confines, but Kathleen loved every inch of it. This was truly their home, built with their own planning and effort, a physical manifestation of the life they were creating together. James celebrated his first birthday in August with a party that seemed to involve half of Silver Creek. He'd grown into a sturdy, happy child who was just beginning to form real words. His favorite was Papa, which he said frequently and with great enthusiasm, making Zachary's face light up every single time. "He's going to be a big brother soon," Kathleen told the assembled guests, her hand resting on her very pregnant belly. "Can you believe it? Our little family is growing." "When's the baby due?" Mrs. Henderson asked, already planning, no doubt, for another celebration. "Late September, according to Mrs. Harmon, though babies come in their own time, as everyone keeps reminding me." As summer faded into early autumn, Kathleen felt the familiar restlessness that preceded birth. She'd arranged for a substitute teacher to take over her classes for the fall term, knowing that she needed to focus on the arrival of their daughter and the adjustment period that would follow. Zachary had become increasingly protective as her due date approached, checking on her constantly, insisting she rest more, worrying over every small discomfort. It would have been annoying if it wasn't so clearly rooted in love and concern. "I'm fine," she told him for the 100th time one evening in mid-September. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I know what to expect." "That doesn't mean I can't worry," he replied, his hand gentle on her swollen belly. "You're carrying my daughter. Both of you are precious to me." "Both of us are fine," Kathleen assured him, "strong and healthy and ready whenever she decides to arrive." Sarah Elizabeth Blackwood decided to arrive during a rainstorm 3 days later. Kathleen's labor started just after midnight, and by dawn the contractions were coming strong and fast. Dr. Harmon was summoned along with Mrs. Harmon and Mrs. Henderson, while Zachary paced the hallway outside the bedroom, looking like he might pass out from anxiety. "This is normal," Mrs. Henderson told him, taking pity on the worried father. "Labor takes time. Go check on James. Make yourself useful. We'll call you when there's news." But Zachary couldn't stay away. He kept returning to the bedroom door, listening to the sounds from within, his face pale with worry. When Kathleen cried out during a particularly strong contraction, he tried to force his way in, only to be physically blocked by Mrs. Henderson's surprisingly strong grip. "You'll only make things worse," she said firmly. "Let the doctor work. Your wife is strong. She'll get through this." Hours passed. The rain continued to fall, drumming on the roof, washing the world clean. James woke and was taken to the Harmons' house to be out of the way. And finally, just as afternoon was shading into evening, a baby's cry pierced the air, strong, healthy, indignant at being thrust into the world. The bedroom door opened. Dr. Harmon stood there, tired but smiling. "You have a daughter, Zachary. A perfect, beautiful daughter. And Kathleen is fine, exhausted, but fine. You can come in now." Zachary didn't walk into that room. He practically ran. Kathleen lay in their bed, looking pale and sweaty and absolutely radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that went straight to his heart. "Meet your daughter," she said softly. "Meet Sarah Elizabeth." Zachary approached slowly, almost reverently, as if afraid he might break the spell. When he looked down at the baby in Kathleen's arms, he felt something in his chest crack open completely. She was tiny, impossibly tiny, with a shock of dark hair and a face scrunched up in newborn displeasure. Her tiny hand waved in the air, and without thinking, Zachary offered his finger. Immediately, impossibly small fingers wrapped around it and held on tight. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She's absolutely perfect." "She has your eyes," Kathleen said. "Look, you can already tell. They're going to be gray like yours." And it was true. Even in her newborn face, even with the vague, unfocused gaze of a baby just hours old, there was something of Zachary in Sarah's features. She was his daughter, his blood daughter, the child he and Kathleen had created together from love and hope, and the determination to build something beautiful from broken pieces. "Can I hold her?" he asked. Kathleen carefully transferred the baby to his arms, and Zachary held his daughter for the first time, this miracle he'd never thought he'd have. Tears streamed down his face unchecked as he looked down at her, as he felt her solid weight and warmth, as he understood in a visceral way that this was his child, his responsibility, his to protect and love and raise. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly. "I'm your papa, and I promise you I will love you every single day of your life. I will protect you and guide you and be there for you no matter what. You and your brother James, you're my whole world. You and your mama are everything." Sarah chose that moment to open her eyes fully, fixing him with that newborn stare that seemed to see right through to the soul. And Zachary swore she smiled at him, just the tiniest quirk of her lips, as if to say that she knew him, that she recognized her father, that everything was going to be all right. The next days were a blur of adjustment and joy. James met his sister with curious fascination, wanting to touch her constantly, saying "baby" over and over with delight. Caroline arrived from Denver just 3 days after Sarah's birth, having received the telegram and immediately arranged leave from her position. She held her niece with tears streaming down her face, whispering to Sarah about the cousins she'd never meet but who would have loved her so much. "She's beautiful," Caroline said. "She's perfect. Rachel would have adored her." "She would have," Zachary agreed, "but she'd also be happy knowing that you're here, that you're part of Sarah's life, that the family continues." Town visitors streamed through for weeks, bringing gifts and meals and congratulations. The school children drew pictures for their teacher's new baby. Mrs. Henderson knit tiny booties and blankets. The Harmons doted on both mother and child, checking on them daily. And through it all, Zachary moved in a state of wonder and gratitude, unable to quite believe that this was his life now. A wife he loved completely. A son who called him Papa with absolute trust. A daughter whose existence still felt miraculous. A sister who'd returned to him, healed and whole. A home they'd built together. A community that had welcomed them all. One evening, when Sarah was 3 weeks old, Zachary sat on the porch of their new house holding his daughter, while James played at his feet and Kathleen sat beside him with her head on his shoulder. The sun was setting over the prairie, painting the sky in those familiar shades of gold and crimson, and everything felt impossibly right. "What are you thinking about?" Kathleen asked softly. "About second chances," Zachary replied. "About how I found you dying on that trail and thought I was just doing my job. About how wrong I was." "What were you really doing?" "Saving myself," he said simply. "I just didn't know it at the time. When I found you, when I decided to help you, that was the moment I chose to live again instead of just existing. You saved me as much as I saved you, Kathleen. maybe more. She lifted her head to kiss him gently. Then we saved each other. And we built this life together, this beautiful, improbable life. Our family. Our family, Zachary echoed, looking at James, at Sarah sleeping peacefully in his arms, at Kathleen beside him. God, I love you all so much. We love you too, Kathleen whispered. We love you too. The sun dipped below the horizon, and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, lamps would soon need to be lit. Dinner would need to be prepared. The children would need to be put to bed. All the ordinary rituals of family life awaited them. But for now, in this perfect moment, they simply sat together watching the day end and the night begin. A family forged from loss and love, whole and complete and home at last. The months following Sarah's birth brought a contentment to the Blackwood household that felt almost surreal in its completeness. Kathleen returned to teaching in January, bringing both James and Sarah to the schoolhouse with her. The children in her class had become experts at tiptoeing during lessons when the baby was sleeping, and the older girls competed for the privilege of holding Sarah during their lunch breaks. Your classroom is more like a family than a school, Reverend Walsh observed one afternoon when he stopped by to discuss curriculum. It's remarkable what you've built here. Children learn better when they feel safe and loved, Kathleen replied, watching as Tommy Peterson carefully showed James how to form his letters on a slate board. And they learn compassion by seeing it practiced. Having the babies here teaches them as much as any lesson I could give. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal, and with it came a letter from Caroline that changed everything. Kathleen was grading papers at the kitchen table while Zachary played with the children on the floor when she opened the envelope and began to read. Her sudden gasp made him look up in concern. What is it? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Kathleen said, her voice filled with wonder. Caroline's met someone, a man named Robert Fletcher, who works as a supervisor at the orphanage. She says he's kind and patient with the children, that he lost his own family to cholera 5 years ago, and that he understands her grief in a way few people can. Zachary sat up straighter. Is she happy? Listen to this part, Kathleen read aloud. For the first time since Rachel died, I can imagine a future that doesn't revolve around loss. Robert makes me laugh, makes me think about tomorrow instead of yesterday. We've been courting for 3 months now, and he's asked me to marry him. I said yes, Zach. I said yes, and I need you to tell me I'm not being foolish, that it's all right to love again. Zachary's face softened. Of course it's all right. God, of course it is. Caroline deserves happiness. She deserves love. There's more, Kathleen continued. She wants to be married here in Silver Creek, wants us to be part of it. She's asking if they can come in June, if we can help arrange a wedding. Then we'll do it, Zachary said immediately. We'll give her the best wedding Silver Creek has ever seen. When has she suffered enough? When has she earned the right to be happy again? The answer is she's earned it 1,000 times over. Planning Caroline's wedding became a community effort. Mrs. Henderson coordinated the reception with her usual efficiency. The church ladies assembled decorations. Dr. and Mrs. Harmon offered their home for the couple to stay during their visit. Even the school children got involved, making garlands of wildflowers and practicing songs to perform at the ceremony. Kathleen threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm, grateful for the distraction from her own secret. She'd suspected for a few weeks now, and Mrs. Harmon had confirmed it just days before Caroline's letter arrived. She was expecting again, due in late November or early December, but she'd decided to wait until after Caroline's wedding to share the news, not wanting to steal any attention from her sister-in-law's moment. You're glowing, Zachary observed one evening as they prepared for bed. Sarah was finally sleeping through most nights, and James had his own small room decorated with drawings from Kathleen's students. You look happy. I am happy, Kathleen said, and it was the simple truth. I have everything I ever wanted, and things I didn't even know to want. How could I not be happy? He pulled her into his arms, his hand settling naturally at her waist. You feel different, he said after a moment. Softer somehow. Are you... He stopped, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. Kathleen? Are you expecting again? She'd wanted to wait, had planned to tell him after the wedding, but the hope and wonder in his face made it impossible to lie. Yes, she admitted. About 3 months along. The baby should arrive around Christmas. Zachary let out a whoop of joy that woke Sarah in the next room, then laughed as he pulled Kathleen into a kiss. Another baby, another child. How did I get so blessed? We're blessed, Kathleen corrected, laughing and crying at the same time. This is our blessing together. Does this mean we're going to fill this house the way I wanted? At this rate, we might need to build an addition, Kathleen teased. But yes, Zachary, we're building the family you dreamed of. The family we both dreamed of. Caroline and Robert arrived in early June, 2 weeks before the planned wedding. Robert Fletcher proved to be everything Caroline had described. A tall, gentle-looking man in his 40s with graying temples and eyes that held both sadness and hope. He was clearly devoted to Caroline, his gaze following her around the room, his hand reaching for hers at every opportunity. Thank you for welcoming me into your family, Robert said to Zachary over dinner the first night. Caroline talks about you all constantly, about how you saved this beautiful family, about the life you've built here. It's inspiring. We saved each other, Zachary replied, glancing at Kathleen. That's what family does. The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Caroline wore a simple but elegant dress of pale lavender that Kathleen and Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers picked that morning by James and Sarah. Well, James had picked them, while Sarah had mostly tried to eat them, but the sentiment was there. When Caroline walked down the aisle on Zachary's arm, both were crying. He stopped halfway to the altar and pulled her into a fierce hug, whispering something that made her laugh through her tears. Then he placed her hand in Robert's and stepped back, taking his place beside Kathleen and their children. We give this woman in marriage, Zachary said when Reverend Walsh asked who gave the bride away. Her family gives her with love and with blessing, and we welcome her husband into our family with open hearts. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Caroline and Robert spoke their vows with voices steady and sure, two people who'd lost everything once and were brave enough to build something new. When they kissed as husband and wife, the entire congregation erupted in applause and cheers. At the reception afterward, Caroline pulled Kathleen aside, away from the crowd. I need to tell you something, she said, her eyes bright with happiness, and something else, uncertainty, perhaps, or worry. What is it? Robert's been offered a position, a better position, with more responsibility and better pay. But it's in San Francisco, not Denver. We'd be leaving Colorado entirely, moving to California. Kathleen felt her heart squeeze. San Francisco was so far away, weeks of travel by train and stage. When? After our honeymoon. We'd leave in August. Carolyn gripped Kathleen's hands. I don't want to go. I don't want to leave you and Zach and the children. You're my family. But this is Robert's dream, and I want to support him the way you support Zachary. Then you should go, Kathleen said, though the words hurt to say. You should go and be happy and build your life with your husband. That's what marriage is about. Building a life together, wherever that leads. But I'll miss everything. I'll miss watching James and Sarah grow up. I'll miss... Caroline stopped, her gaze dropping to Kathleen's stomach. You're expecting again, aren't you? I can tell, and I won't be here to help with the baby. No, you'll be in California building your own family, Kathleen said firmly. Caroline, you've spent years taking care of other people, taking care of me and my children. It's time for you to take care of yourself and your marriage. We'll visit. We'll write letters. The distance doesn't change how much we love you. Caroline pulled her into a tight embrace. How did you get so wise? From you, Kathleen replied. From Zachary. From everyone who's shown me that love doesn't end just because circumstances change. They told Zachary together later that evening, after most of the guests had gone home and it was just family. He took the news quietly, his face unreadable, and excused himself to walk outside. Kathleen found him standing by the porch rail, staring out at the darkening prairie. Are you all right? She asked softly. I just got her back, he said, his voice rough. After 2 years of not speaking, after all the pain and healing, I just got my sister back, and now she's leaving again. She's not leaving you, Zachary. She's starting her own life. Isn't that what you wanted for her? For her to heal and find happiness? I know that intellectually, but my heart... He stopped, shook his head. My heart wants to keep her close, keep her safe, make sure nothing ever hurts her again. Kathleen moved to stand beside him, taking his hand. You can't protect people from life. You can only love them and trust them to make their own choices. Caroline's choosing to follow her husband to California. That's not a rejection of you or us. It's an affirmation of the healing you helped her find. She's strong enough now to build her own family because you helped her remember how. When did you become the wise one in this relationship? Zachary asked, pulling her close. I think we take turns, Kathleen replied. Right now, it's my turn to remind you that love is bigger than geography. California isn't the moon. We can visit. She can come back, and our children will know their Aunt Caroline no matter how far away she lives. The next 2 months passed in a bittersweet blur. Caroline and Robert stayed in Silver Creek for their honeymoon, and the families spent as much time together as possible. Robert fit seamlessly into their lives, patient with the children, and quick to help with anything that needed doing. By the time they left for California in August, even Zachary had to admit that his sister had chosen well. The day of their departure was difficult. Caroline held Sarah for a long time, whispering promises to the baby who was too young to understand. She knelt down to James's level, telling him to be a good big brother and to help his mama when the new baby came. And she held Zachary while both of them cried, saying goodbye without really saying it because goodbyes felt too final. This isn't the end, Caroline said fiercely. This is just distance. We're still family. We'll always be family. I know, Zachary managed. I know. I'm happy for you, Caro. I really am, but I'm going to miss you like hell. Miss me then, she said, cupping his face in her hands. Miss me, and write to me, and remember that I love you, that I'm grateful for you, that you gave me back my life when I thought it was over. They watched the stage pull away, Caroline waving from the window until they couldn't see her anymore. That night, Zachary was quiet, processing his emotions in the way he did. Internally, carefully, with the same methodical approach he brought to his deputy work. Kathleen let him be, understanding that some grief needed to be carried alone before it could be shared. But later, when they were in bed and the children were asleep, he finally spoke. I'm glad she found happiness. I'm glad she has Robert and a new life ahead of her. But I hate that healing means distance. I hate that the people we love keep leaving. Not everyone leaves, Kathleen said softly. I'm still here. James and Sarah are here. The baby I'm carrying is here. We're your family, Zachary, and we're not going anywhere. Promise me, he said urgently, turning to face her. Promise me you'll never leave, that no matter what happens, we'll face it together. I promise, she said without hesitation, for better or worse, in sickness and health, as long as we both shall live. Remember? We made those vows, and I meant every word. I'm yours, Zachary Blackwood, yours and our children's, forever. He held her close that night, and Kathleen felt the tension gradually leave his body as he allowed himself to believe her promise. In the morning, he seemed more settled, more at peace with Caroline's departure. And in the days that followed, he threw himself into preparing for the new baby with an enthusiasm that made Kathleen laugh. We already have 2 children, she reminded him as he built yet another cradle, this one more elaborate than the previous ones. We know how to do this. But each baby is different, he insisted. This one deserves their own special things, their own welcome into the world. The autumn brought changes to Silver Creek beyond the Blackwood household. Mayor Thornton announced his retirement, and the town held elections for a new mayor. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Zachary was nominated and ultimately elected by a wide margin. He tried to refuse, claiming his deputy duties kept him busy enough, but the town wouldn't hear of it. You're respected here, Dr. Harmon told him bluntly. You're fair and honest, and you genuinely care about people. Those are qualities this town needs in a leader. But what about my work as deputy? I can't do both jobs. So train someone new, the doctor replied. Young Timothy Walsh has been asking about law enforcement work. You could mentor him, pass on what you know. That's what good leaders do. They build up others to take their place. Kathleen watched her husband wrestle with the decision, understanding his reluctance. Being a deputy was who he'd been for so long, how he defined himself. But finally, after much discussion and prayer, he accepted the position of mayor and began training Timothy Walsh to take over his deputy duties. I feel like I'm losing part of my identity, he admitted to Kathleen one evening. You're not losing it, she corrected. You're evolving it. You'll still be protecting this town, still helping people. You're just doing it from a different position now. What if I'm not good at it? What if I let people down? Then you'll figure it out and do better next time. That's what you always do. She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly. Besides, this baby needs a father who comes home safely every night, not one who's out chasing rustlers and outlaws. Maybe this is exactly the right change at exactly the right time. As if to prove her point, the baby kicked hard against Zachary's palm, making him smile. All right, little one, he said to Kathleen's stomach. I hear you. Your mama's right, as usual. November arrived with cold winds and the first hints of snow. Kathleen's pregnancy was progressing well, though she was more tired this time than she'd been with Sarah. Dr. Harmon examined her regularly and pronounced everything normal, but advised her to rest more. 3 pregnancies in 3 years is a lot for your body, he said gently. You're healthy and strong, but you need to be careful. No more teaching until after the baby arrives and you've recovered. Kathleen reluctantly agreed, turning her class over to a substitute teacher the first week of December. It felt strange to be home all day, strange not to have the structure and purpose of teaching. But James and Sarah kept her busy, and Zachary had arranged his new mayoral duties so he could work from home more often. I like having you here, James said one afternoon as Kathleen helped him practice his letters. He was 4 now, bright and curious and increasingly independent. You're always at school, usually. Well, I'm here now, Kathleen assured him, and when the baby comes, I'll be home even more. You and Sarah will have to help me take care of your new brother or sister. I hope it's a brother, James declared. Boys are better than girls. Your sister might disagree with that, Kathleen laughed. Sarah, now 14 months old and toddling everywhere with determined enthusiasm, had definitely inherited her father's stubborn streak. The baby arrived 2 weeks before Christmas, on a cold, clear night when stars blazed overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. This labor was faster than Sarah's had been, and by dawn Kathleen held another daughter in her arms, small and perfect, with a surprising amount of dark hair and lungs that could wake the entire household. Another girl, Zachary said with wonder, holding his newest daughter with the same reverent care he'd shown Sarah. We have 2 daughters and a son. We're building quite the family, Mrs. Blackwood. What should we name her? Kathleen asked. They discussed names but hadn't settled on anything definite, wanting to wait until they met the baby. Zachary studied his daughter's face thoughtfully. What about Rachel, after my sister, and maybe Marie for the middle name, after your mother? Rachel Marie Blackwood, Kathleen tested the name. It's beautiful, and it honors both our families. Yes, I love it. James and Sarah met their new sister with mixed reactions. James was fascinated, wanting to touch her constantly, asking endless questions about why she was so small and when she'd be big enough to play. Sarah seemed less impressed, clearly suspicious of this noisy creature who was taking up so much of their parents' attention. She'll warm up, Mrs. Henderson assured them when she stopped by with food and supplies. Give Sarah time. She was the baby, and now she's not. That's a big adjustment for a little one. Christmas that year was quiet but deeply meaningful. They stayed home rather than attending the town celebration, wanting to cocoon themselves in new parenthood. Caroline sent gifts from California, beautiful hand-knitted items for all 3 children, and a long letter full of news about her own life. She was expecting 2, she wrote, due in the spring. The cousins would be close in age even if they were far apart in distance. Our children will know each other through letters and visits, Kathleen said, reading the letter aloud to Zachary. They'll grow up knowing they have family all over, people who love them even from far away. Like we grew up? Zachary asked. No, Kathleen corrected gently. Better than we grew up. Because we'll make sure they know they're loved and wanted and part of something bigger than themselves. We'll give them the security and stability we both had to find as adults. The months following Rachel's birth brought both challenges and joys. 3 children under 5 years old kept Kathleen constantly busy, and even with Zachary's help and occasional visits from Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Harmon, there were days when she felt overwhelmed by the sheer logistics of feeding, changing, and caring for 3 small humans. I don't know how my mother did this with 7 children, she told Zachary one evening after a particularly chaotic day. Rachel had been colicky, Sarah had discovered how to climb furniture with terrifying efficiency, and James had decided to conduct a scientific experiment involving mud, the kitchen floor, and every pot they owned. Your mother had help, Zachary reminded her, gently taking Rachel so Kathleen could rest. And more importantly, she had days just like this one, days where everything was chaos and nothing went right. That's just parenthood. Is this what you imagined when you said you wanted a big family? Kathleen asked, only half joking. Absolutely, Zachary replied, and he was completely sincere. This noise, this chaos, this beautiful, exhausting mess, this is exactly what I wanted. This is life, Kathleen. Real, messy, imperfect life. And I love every minute of it. As Rachel grew from infant to baby and Sarah adjusted to being a middle child, Kathleen slowly returned to teaching. She arranged for Mrs. Henderson to watch Rachel during school hours, while Sarah stayed at home with a rotation of town ladies who'd volunteered to help. James attended his mother's school now, sitting in the front row and taking his lessons very seriously. The pattern of their days became a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were for school and work, afternoons for family time, evenings for the small domestic rituals that bound them together, dinner around the table, baths for the children, bedtime stories read by Zachary in his deep, gentle voice, and finally, precious quiet moments when he and Kathleen could simply be together. Do you ever regret it? Zachary asked one such evening. They were sitting on their porch watching the sun set, as had become their habit. The children were finally asleep, and the house was blessedly quiet. Marrying me so quickly, taking on my grief and my sister and all the complications I brought into your life? Kathleen turned to look at him, this man who'd saved her life and then given her a new one. His gray eyes were uncertain in the fading light, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. Never, she said firmly, not for a single moment. Zachary, you gave me everything, a home, a family, a purpose, a love I'd thought I'd lost forever. You gave James a father and our daughters a life full of security and joy. How could I ever regret that? Even when it's hard, even when the children are screaming and money's tight and nothing goes the way we planned? Especially then, Kathleen replied, because those are the moments that prove love is real. Anyone can be happy when things are easy. But choosing to love each other when it's hard, when we're tired and overwhelmed and not at our best, that's what real marriage is. And ours is very, very real. He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as stars began to emerge overhead. From inside the house came a small cry, Rachel waking from a dream probably, and both of them sighed but smiled. I'll get her, Zachary said, starting to rise. No, let me, Kathleen countered. You got up with her twice last night. Rock, paper, scissors for it? They played, and Zachary won, which meant Kathleen had to go tend to Rachel. But as she walked inside, she looked back to see her husband still sitting on the porch, his face tilted up to the stars, an expression of contentment on his face that made her heart full. The years passed in this way, measured not by grand events, but by small moments. James lost his first tooth and started reading chapter books with voracious enthusiasm. Sarah developed a stubborn independence that frequently clashed with parental authority, but that Kathleen recognized as strength in formation. Rachel proved to be the most social of the three children, always wanting to be wherever people were, charming everyone she met with her ready smile. Letters from Caroline arrived regularly, full of news about her growing family. She'd had 3 children in quick succession, 2 boys and a girl, and from her descriptions her household was just as chaotic as the Blackwoods. Robert was doing well in his work, and Caroline had started a small school at their church in San Francisco, teaching children whose parents couldn't afford regular schooling. She's happy, Kathleen observed after reading one particularly long letter aloud. Really, genuinely happy. You can hear it in the way she writes. I'm glad, Zachary said, and meant it. I miss her, but I'm glad she found her place. In the summer of 1877, 4 years after their wedding, unexpected news arrived that would test the strength they'd built together. Zachary came home from town hall looking troubled, and Kathleen knew immediately that something was wrong. What is it? She asked, setting aside the mending she'd been working on. There's been trouble in Denver. The territorial marshal is asking for experienced lawmen to help with a situation involving organized crime. They've specifically requested me because of my years as deputy and my reputation. He sat heavily in his chair. They want me to go for at least 3 months, maybe longer. Kathleen felt her stomach drop. 3 months without Zachary. 3 months of managing the children and the house and her teaching alone. 3 months of worry, wondering if he was safe. "Do you want to go?" she asked carefully. "Part of me does," he admitted. "The part that misses the excitement of law work, that wants to feel useful in that way again. But the bigger part, the part that matters, wants to stay here with you and the children. I don't want to leave you, Kathleen. Not for 3 months. Not for 3 days." "But they need you," Kathleen said slowly, thinking it through. "And you're good at what you do. You could make a real difference in Denver. At what cost? Missing months of our children's lives? Leaving you to carry everything alone?" Kathleen moved to kneel in front of his chair, taking his hands in hers. "Zachary, when you found me on that prairie, you were a deputy. That work is part of who you are. If this is something you feel called to do, something that matters, then I'll support you. We'll manage. The children and I will be fine." "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted honestly. "I'm terrified of being without you, terrified something might happen to you in Denver. But I'm also sure that our marriage is strong enough to survive 3 months apart. And I'm sure that you need to know you can still do this work, that you didn't lose that part of yourself when you became mayor and husband and father." They talked late into the night, weighing options and concerns. Finally, Zachary agreed to go, but with conditions. He'd take the assignment, but limit it to 2 months, not 3. He'd write every week, and he'd come home immediately if there was any emergency with Kathleen or the children. The day he left for Denver was one of the hardest of Kathleen's life. James, now 6 and old enough to understand, tried to be brave but cried when his father hugged him goodbye. Sarah, 4 years old and her father's shadow, refused to let go until Zachary gently pried her arms from around his neck. Rachel, just 2, didn't fully grasp what was happening but cried because everyone else was crying. 2 months, Zachary said, holding Kathleen close one last time. "I'll be back in 2 months. And I'll write every chance I get." "Stay safe," Kathleen whispered. "Come home to us." "Always," he promised. "Always." The first few weeks were the hardest. The children were cranky and difficult, missing their father and acting out their feelings in the way children do. Kathleen found herself exhausted by bedtime, falling into sleep without the comfort of Zachary's presence beside her. But his letters came regularly, as promised, full of details about his work and reassurances of his love. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Harmon rallied around Kathleen, helping with the children and offering emotional support. Her students at school were extra well-behaved, as if sensing their teacher needed them to be. And gradually, Kathleen found her rhythm, found her strength, and discovered that she could manage alone if she had to, though she much preferred not having to. 7 weeks into Zachary's absence, a telegram arrived that made Kathleen's blood run cold. There had been a raid that went wrong. Several marshals injured, Zachary among them. He was stable but hospitalized. More information to follow. The next 3 days were torture. Kathleen couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely function beyond the minimum needed to care for the children. Dr. Harmon offered to go to Denver to check on Zachary himself, but before he could leave, another telegram arrived. Zachary was coming home. He'd been shot. Again, Kathleen thought with dark humor. But this time it was minor, a graze across his ribs that looked worse than it was. The marshal was releasing him early given his injury and his desire to return to his family. When the stage arrived, Kathleen was waiting with all 3 children. The moment Zachary stepped down, moving carefully because of his bandaged ribs, James launched himself at his father. Zachary caught him with a grunt of pain but didn't let go, holding his son tight while Sarah grabbed his legs and Rachel toddled over demanding to be picked up too. "Careful," Kathleen cautioned, even as she moved into the embrace herself. "Your father's hurt." "I'm fine," Zachary insisted, his arms somehow managing to encompass all of them. "I'm better than fine. I'm home." That night, after the children were finally asleep and Zachary had been examined by Dr. Harmon and declared well enough, he and Kathleen lay in their bed holding each other in the darkness. "I'm done," Zachary said quietly. "No more marshal work, no more putting myself in danger. I thought I needed to prove I could still do that work, that I was still that person. But I was wrong. The person I need to be is here, in this bed, in this house, with this family. That's who I am now. That's who I want to be. Are you sure? Kathleen asked. Because if you need that work, I need you more, he interrupted. I need our children more. Out there in Denver, when that raid went bad and I thought I might die, all I could think about was how stupid I'd been to leave you. How I'd wasted 2 months we could have spent together. How you and the children are my purpose now, not law enforcement. You weren't wasting time, Kathleen said gently. You were helping people. That's noble work. Maybe. But my most important work is here. Being your husband, being their father, building this life we've created. He pulled her closer, mindful of his injury. I'm home, Kathleen. Really home. And I'm not leaving again. True to his word, Zachary settled completely into civilian life after that. He threw himself into his duties as mayor with renewed focus, working to improve Silver Creek schools and infrastructure. He became a mentor to young men in town who needed guidance, filling the teaching role he'd once dreamed of in a different way. And he was present for his children in a way that made Kathleen's heart full, attending school performances, teaching James to ride, having tea parties with Sarah and Rachel, making them all feel safe and loved and valued. The family continued to grow, though not with more children. Instead, their extended family expanded. Caroline and Robert visited in the summer of 1879, bringing their 3 children for a month-long stay that turned the Blackwood house into a place of joyful chaos. The cousins bonded despite living so far apart, and Zachary and Caroline spent hours talking and laughing, their relationship fully healed and stronger for having been broken and rebuilt. Thank you, Caroline told Kathleen one evening during that visit. They were sitting on the porch watching their collective 6 children play in the yard while Zachary and Robert discussed politics nearby. For taking care of my brother. For giving him the family he needed. He's happy, Kathleen. Really, truly happy. I can see it in everything he does. He gave me just as much, Kathleen replied. More, probably. I was lost and broken when he found me. Now look at us. She gestured at the scene before them. Children playing, husbands talking, the solid house they'd built together, the life they'd created. This is everything I didn't dare dream of when I was dying on that prairie. You've built something beautiful, Caroline said. Both of you have. And you've taught me that it's possible to survive the worst loss and still find joy again. That's a precious gift. As the years passed, the Blackwood children grew from toddlers to children to young people with their own personalities and dreams. James developed his mother's love of learning and his father's sense of justice, talking about becoming either a teacher or a lawyer. Sarah inherited Zachary's stubbornness and protective instincts, always looking out for her younger sister and standing up to bullies at school. Rachel, with her social nature and quick smile, seemed destined to follow in her Aunt Caroline's footsteps, already organizing neighborhood children into elaborate games and lessons. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Kathleen by taking her back to the spot where they'd first met, that boulder on the prairie where she'd been ready to die protecting James. They rode out on a warm December morning, leaving the children with Mrs. Henderson, and stood together looking at the endless expanse of grass and sky. Do you remember what you said to me that day? Zachary asked, his arm around her waist. I told you to stay back, Kathleen recalled with a slight smile. I threatened to shoot you. And I saw the bravest person I'd ever met, he continued, someone who had nothing left but love and the determination to protect it. That's when I fell in love with you, Kathleen, right there, in that moment. I didn't have nothing, Kathleen corrected softly. I had James, and as it turned out, I had you too. I just didn't know it yet. They stood together as the wind whispered through the grass, the same wind that had blown the day they met. But everything else had changed. They were no longer broken people stumbling toward an uncertain future. They were whole, healed, complete in their love for each other and the family they'd built. What do you think our children will remember about growing up? Zachary asked. Kathleen considered the question. I think they'll remember that they were loved, that they were safe, that they had parents who chose each other every single day, even when it was hard. That home was a place of joy and laughter and occasional chaos, but always love. Always love. That's what I hope too, Zachary said, that they'll know what real love looks like because they saw it between us. that they'll understand commitment and partnership and the kind of marriage that's built to last. They rode back to town as afternoon shadows lengthened, back to their children and their home, and the life they continued to build together day by day, year by year. That evening, with all three children tucked into bed and the house finally quiet, Zachary pulled out a surprise, a photograph he'd commissioned without Kathleen knowing. It showed their family the previous summer, all five of them posed on the front porch of their home. James stood tall and serious behind his seated parents. Sarah perched on the arm of Zachary's chair, with Rachel in Kathleen's lap. Everyone was smiling, even Sarah, who usually hated sitting still for photographs. And the love between them was visible in every detail, in the way Zachary's hand rested on Kathleen's shoulder, in the way the children leaned toward their parents, in the expressions of contentment on every face. "This is us," Zachary said as they looked at the photograph together. "This is what we built from that day on the prairie. A family. A real, solid, lasting family." Kathleen traced the faces in the photograph with one finger, her eyes bright with tears. "This is what love looks like," she said. "Not the fairy tale version where everything is easy and perfect. The real version where two broken people find each other and decide to build something beautiful from their brokenness. Where they choose each other every single day and work to create a life worth living." "And have we?" Zachary asked. "Created a life worth living?" "Yes," Kathleen said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. This life, this family, this love, it's worth everything we went through to find it. Outside, snow began to fall again, the same way it had on their wedding night 10 years before. Inside the warm house, surrounded by evidence of the life they'd built, children's drawings on the walls, books overflowing from shelves, toys scattered across floors, the comfortable clutter of family life, Zachary and Kathleen held each other and watched the snow paint the world white and clean and new. They'd both lost so much before finding each other. Thomas and Rachel's family, dreams and plans, the lives they'd expected to live. But from that loss had come something precious and unexpected. A second chance. A chance to love again, to hope again, to build again. And they'd taken that chance and created something that honored both what they'd lost and what they'd found. The deputy and the widow, who'd met on a dusty trail under a dying sun, had become the mayor and the teacher, the father and mother, the husband and wife. They'd taken their brokenness and forged it into wholeness. They'd taken their grief and transformed it into joy. They'd taken a moment of desperate salvation and turned it into a lifetime of love. Their story wouldn't be written in history books or remembered beyond Silver Creek and the people whose lives they touched. But it would live on in their children and their children's children, in the values they passed down and the love they modeled. It would live on in every family that found hope after loss, in every person who chose to try again after tragedy, in every heart that remained open to love even after being broken. What began as a chance encounter on a desolate prairie ended as a promise kept and a life well lived. Love had found its way home, just as it always does for those brave enough to seek it and strong enough to hold on. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. Not how they'd met, but how they'd chosen each other, day after day, year after year, building something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of what they'd lost. The photograph would remain on their wall for the rest of their lives, a testament to what they'd created together. And years later, when their grandchildren asked about the serious-looking deputy and the exhausted-looking widow in old, faded pictures, James and Sarah and Rachel would tell them the truth, that their parents' love story began with salvation and became something so much greater, a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a love that proved second chances were real, and that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found riding out of the sunset on horseback. Their story was complete now, the circle closed, the promise fulfilled. The deputy had found his second chance. The widow had found her salvation. And together they'd built a family, a home, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. That was enough. That was everything. That was exactly how love was supposed to work.